"I'll marry the first man who enters," she joked. The Duke walked in. He wasn't laughing. The afternoon sun cast dappled shadows across Lady Hartwell's garden, turning the manicured lawns into a patchwork of gold and green that would have been enchanting had Rosalind possessed any capacity for enchantment remaining. She had exhausted that particular resource somewhere around her third season, when the pitying glances had begun to outnumber the curious ones, and the whispers behind fans had shifted from speculation about which eligible gentleman might claim her to resigned agreement that none ever would. She stood near the refreshment table, her gloved fingers wrapped around a glass of lemonade she had no intention of drinking, watching the familiar dance of society unfold before her with the detached observation of a naturalist studying specimens. There was Lady Pemberton, steering her unfortunate daughter toward the newly titled Viscount Ashby with all the subtlety of a shepherd driving sheep. There was Mrs. Crawford, whose turban had grown increasingly elaborate with each passing year, currently holding court among the dowagers with whatever fresh gossip had emerged from last night's Worthington ball. And there, approaching with the inevitable certainty of storm clouds, was her mother. The Countess of Thornbury moved through the crowd with practised grace, her silk gown whispering against the grass, her expression fixed in the pleasant mask she wore in public, the one that concealed the perpetual disappointment Rosalind had become intimately familiar with over 24 years of failing to meet expectations. "Rosalind." Her mother's voice was pitched perfectly to carry no further than necessary. "You are standing alone again." "I am aware of my own positioning, mother. Do not be clever, it is unbecoming." The Countess's gaze swept the garden, cataloguing and dismissing potential matches with the efficiency of a general surveying a battlefield. "Lord Wetherby is here. He was recently widowed. Lord Wetherby is 73 and smells of camphor. He is a marquis. He is also nearly deaf and has the conversational range of a particularly uninspired turnip." Rosalind raised her lemonade glass, not drinking, simply creating a barrier between herself and her mother's ambitions. "I believe I would rather remain unmarried than spend my evenings shouting compliments about root vegetables." The Countess's nostrils flared her only permitted display of frustration. "You believe you would rather, as if you have any notion of what remaining unmarried truly means, as if your father has not made the alternative perfectly clear." The words landed precisely as intended, and Rosalind felt the familiar cold settle in her chest. Mr. Horace Pemberton. Wealthy, certainly. Connected, adequately. Possessed of a fortune made in trade that her father's mounting debts had rendered suddenly acceptable despite years of sneering at the merchant class. Also possessed of small, wet eyes that lingered too long on her bodice, and hands that had, on 2 separate occasions, found their way to her person in manners that could not be entirely attributed to the crush of a crowded ballroom. She had 2 months. 2 months until her father's ultimatum expired, and she would be expected to accept Mr. Pemberton's suit, or find herself cast out without a penny, without references, without any of the protections that came with being the Earl of Thornbury's daughter. "I am aware of the situation," Rosalind said quietly. "Then stop hiding by the lemonade and make yourself agreeable." Her mother's hand closed briefly on her elbow, not an affectionate gesture, merely a corrective one. "God knows it should not be difficult. You are not entirely without looks, and your dowry, while not what it once was, remains respectable. If you would simply learn to hold your tongue—" "If I held my tongue any more firmly, mother, I should swallow it entirely. Better that than the alternative." The Countess released her and turned away. "Lord Wetherby is by the rose arbour. At least make the attempt." Rosalind watched her mother glide back into the social fray, dispensing smiles and nods like a queen granting favours to particularly loyal subjects. The coldness in her chest spread outward, settling into her limbs with the weight of accumulated failures. 5 seasons, 5 years of ballrooms and garden parties and carefully orchestrated introductions, and she had managed to drive away every single prospect with her inability to be what they wanted, what any of them wanted. She set down the lemonade glass with more force than necessary and turned toward the garden's edge, seeking the relative privacy of Lady Hartwell's famous wisteria walk. The trailing purple blooms created a fragrant tunnel, dappled light filtering through the cascading flowers, and Rosalind had nearly reached its sanctuary when a familiar voice stopped her. "Running away again?" Helena Ashby stood beneath the wisteria's entrance, her widow's grey setting off the dark elegance of her features, her knowing smile suggesting she had witnessed the entire exchange with Rosalind's mother. At 31, Helena had achieved the peculiar freedom of a wealthy widow answerable to no one, pitied by society just enough to be left alone, and possessed of the sharp intelligence that made her the only person in London whose company Rosalind actively sought. "Strategic retreat," Rosalind corrected, joining her friend beneath the purple canopy. "There is a difference." "Is there?" "Certainly. Running away suggests panic. Strategic retreat implies forethought and the intention to fight another day." Helena's smile softened into something more genuine. "And will you fight another day?" Rosalind did not answer immediately. She walked deeper into the wisteria tunnel, Helena falling into step beside her, their skirts brushing against the carpet of fallen petals beneath their feet. The sounds of the garden party faded, replaced by the drowsy hum of bees and the distant call of a songbird. "I am running out of days," she finally admitted. "Father has made his position abundantly clear. Pemberton has made his intentions equally so." "The merchant?" Helena's voice carried careful neutrality, but Rosalind knew her well enough to hear the concern beneath it. "The very same. He has apparently decided that acquiring an earl's daughter would lend his empire a certain legitimacy." Rosalind laughed, the sound brittle even to her own ears. "I cannot imagine why he wants me specifically. Surely there are more biddable daughters available, ones who would not be tempted to discuss his receding hairline at dinner parties." "Rosalind. Or his habit of standing too close, or the way his eyes—" She stopped walking, suddenly unable to continue the pretense of levity. "Helena, I cannot marry him. I know that sounds like pride speaking, and perhaps it is, but when he looks at me, I feel as though I am already owned, already purchased and displayed on a shelf like one of his imported porcelains." Helena touched her arm gently. "Then don't marry him." "And do what instead?" "Become a governess. I have no accomplishments worthy of the name. My needlework is mediocre, my watercolors are worse, and my French carries an accent that would make any respectable family question my education." Rosalind resumed walking, faster now, as if she could outpace the reality closing in around her. "I could be a companion, I suppose. Some elderly lady might appreciate my ability to read aloud with reasonable expression, although my tongue would likely get me dismissed within a fortnight." "You are catastrophizing." "I am being realistic. A skill I have been forced to develop rather late in life, but one I am now cultivating with considerable dedication." They emerged from the wisteria tunnel into a small clearing where a stone bench sat beneath an ancient oak. Rosalind sank onto it, suddenly exhausted by the effort of maintaining her composure. Helena settled beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched a small comfort, but a genuine one. "There must be someone," Helena said quietly. "In all of London, surely there is one acceptable gentleman who has not yet been driven away by your wit." "My wit, as you so kindly call it, has proven remarkably efficient at driving away everyone." Rosalind pulled off her gloves, needing the feel of the cool stone beneath her bare palms. "Do you know what Lord Ashbury said to Lady Morton after our single dance last season. He said I was like a hedgehog, interesting enough to observe from a distance, but too prickly to actually hold. Lord Ashbury is a documented fool who once asked me if Italy was part of France. Perhaps, but he was not wrong about me. Rosalind stared at her hands, at the bare fingers that had never worn a betrothal ring, that likely never would. I have been told my entire life that I am too much, too sharp, too clever, too quick to speak and too slow to submit. Mother has been trying to sand down my edges since I was old enough to have them, and I have stubbornly refused to be smoothed. And now, she laughed again, that same brittle sound. Now I am too old, too unmarried, and too out of options to pretend my stubbornness was anything but self-destruction. That is your mother speaking. No, that is reality. Rosalind looked up, meeting Helena's concerned gaze. I spent 5 years believing I was preserving myself, that holding on to my wit and my opinions and my inconvenient honesty was somehow noble, that the right man would appreciate those things, would want a wife with thoughts of her own. But the right man never appeared, and the wrong ones kept walking away, and now I am facing marriage to Horace Pemberton because I was too proud to learn to hold my tongue. Helena was quiet for a long moment. The bee-hum continued around them, indifferent to human troubles. Somewhere beyond the wisteria, the garden party carried on the bright laughter and tinkling glasses and careful machinations of society, perpetuating itself. "What if you did marry?" Helena finally asked. "Someone else? Anyone else? Simply to escape Pemberton? I would require a someone else willing to have me. That particular species has proven elusive." "You are being dramatic." "I am being accurate." Rosalind stood abruptly, pacing the small clearing like a caged creature. "Do you know how many men have expressed interest in me over 5 seasons? Genuine interest, not merely the kind that evaporates after 10 minutes of conversation? 4. And of those 4, 1 was already secretly betrothed. 1 turned out to be a fortune hunter, disappointed by the reality of my dowry. 1 died of a fever before anything could come of it, and 1... She stopped, shaking her head. 1 I drove away myself, because he was kind and dull, and the thought of spending my life making conversation about his hunting dogs made me want to scream into a pillow. Perhaps you should have screamed into a pillow. Perhaps I should have married him and screamed into pillows for the rest of my life. At least I would have pillows of my own." Rosalind turned back toward the wisteria tunnel, toward the sounds of the party she would have to rejoin. "I am tired, Helena. Tired of trying to be less than I am and failing at even that. Tired of my mother's disappointment and my father's ultimatums and society's endless appetite for watching me fail to secure a husband." She squared her shoulders, reassembling her armor piece by piece. "Perhaps I should simply embrace the absurdity, walk back into that garden and announce that I'll marry the first man who enters through the gate, whoever he may be, regardless of age or appearance or personal hygiene." Helena laughed despite herself. "That would certainly cause a sensation. It would give the gossips something new to discuss, at least. They must be growing bored with my failures by now." Rosalind began walking, Helena falling into step beside her once more. Perhaps Lord Weatherby would toddle through the gate and I could spend my remaining years shouting compliments about his turnips. Perhaps it would be someone's elderly valet, lost and looking for the servants' entrance. Perhaps... She stopped at the edge of the wisteria tunnel, the garden party now visible before them, the bright silks and darker coats, the glittering jewels and careful smiles, the endless performance of polite society. Her mother was visible near the fountain, still conversing with Mrs. Crawford, occasionally glancing in the direction Rosalind had disappeared, with an expression that promised future recrimination. "You know," Rosalind said softly, something reckless rising in her chest, I almost mean it. At this point, anyone would be better than Pemberton. Anyone at all. Rosalind, I'm serious." The recklessness grew, fueled by years of frustration and fear and the terrible exhaustion of fighting a battle she could not win. "I'll marry the first man who walks through that gate, whoever he may be, if only to escape Pemberton's sweaty palms and my mother's eternal disappointment." She gestured toward the garden's main entrance. Visible across the lawn, the ornate iron gate that led from Lady Hartwell's drive onto the party grounds. It stood open, as it had for the past hour, with no one approaching. "You don't mean that," Helena said carefully. "Don't I?" Rosalind laughed, a wild edge creeping into the sound. "What difference would it make, one prison or another? At least if fate chooses for me, I can blame someone other than myself for the outcome." "Rosalind, stop. You're not thinking clearly." But Rosalind was no longer listening. Her attention had been caught by movement at the garden gate, by the dark figure that had appeared as if summoned by her reckless words. She watched, her laughter dying in her throat, as the man passed through the iron archway and paused to survey the scene before him. He was tall, that was her first impression. Tall and dark, with hair that seemed to absorb the afternoon light rather than reflect it, and a bearing that suggested he found garden parties slightly beneath his dignity. His clothes were immaculate, his posture rigid, and as he turned his head toward the wisteria walk toward her, she saw a face of such severe beauty that it bordered on cruelty. Grey eyes, cold as winter, fixed directly on her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her chest. Beside her, Helena made a small, strangled sound. "Oh, God! Who is that?" Rosalind whispered, but even as she asked, some part of her already knew. There was only one man in London who moved through society like an iceberg through warm water, chilling everything in his path. "That," Helena breathed, "is the Duke of Ashworth." The Duke of Ashworth, Sebastian Cole, the man society had nicknamed the Ice Duke for his notorious emotional inaccessibility, the man who had been on the marriage market for over a decade, without ever indicating the slightest interest in any of the women presented to him. The man who was currently walking across Lady Hartwell's lawn with deliberate, measured steps, his winter-grey eyes never wavering from Rosalind's face. He had heard her. The realization hit her like cold water. He had heard every word, had been approaching the gate just as she made her ridiculous declaration, had witnessed her desperate jest, and was now— He stopped 3 feet from where she stood, frozen at the entrance to the wisteria tunnel. Up close, his features were even more severe. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that seemed carved from marble, and those eyes grey as storm clouds, grey as granite, grey as the sea in winter. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, premature but striking, and his expression gave absolutely nothing away. "Lady Rosalind Blackwell." His voice was deep and flat, carrying no warmth whatsoever. It was not a question. "Your Grace." The words emerged automatically, the trained responses of 5 seasons asserting themselves despite her shock. She curtsied, the movement mechanical. "I don't believe we have been formally—" "I accept." The words fell into the afternoon air like stones dropped into still water. Rosalind felt ripples of shock spreading outward, not just through herself, but through the guests who had turned to watch this unprecedented scene, the Ice Duke approaching the Earl of Thornbury's spinster daughter, speaking to her with what almost approached directness. "I beg your pardon," she managed. "Your offer." He didn't blink, didn't smile, didn't show any sign of human emotion whatsoever. "I accept it." The blood drained from Rosalind's face so quickly she felt dizzy. That was not I was merely— You stated, quite clearly, that you would marry the first man who entered through that gate." He nodded toward the iron archway behind him. "I am that man. I accept. That was a joke. I am not laughing." No, Rosalind thought wildly, he was not. She had never seen anyone look less amused in her entire life. His face remained perfectly expressionless, those winter eyes holding hers with unnerving intensity, and she felt rather like a rabbit who had just made an unfortunate comment about foxes, only to discover one standing directly behind her. "Your Grace," Helena interjected, her voice admirably steady, "surely you understand that Lady Rosalind was speaking in jest. It would hardly be appropriate to hold her to a statement made in frustration, in desperation, in earnest." The Duke's gaze flickered to Helena briefly before returning to Rosalind. "I heard the entire conversation, Mrs. Ashby. I am aware that Lady Rosalind faces a choice between an unpleasant match and an uncertain future. I am offering her a third option." "You are not offering anything," Rosalind said, finally finding her voice. "You are making sport of me." For the first time something shifted in his expression, a slight narrowing of the eyes that might have indicated surprise or irritation, or possibly just boredom. "I do not make sport, Lady Rosalind. I do not, in fact, make anything that could be classified as amusing. I am told it is one of my many deficiencies." "Then why would you possibly—" She stopped, aware of the growing audience around them. Lady Morton had drifted closer, her fan fluttering with barely concealed excitement. Mrs. Crawford's turban was practically vibrating with the effort of absorbing gossip. Even her mother had noticed, her face a complicated mask of confusion and dawning hope. "This is absurd," Rosalind said, lowering her voice. "We have never spoken before. We have never even been properly introduced. You cannot simply walk into a garden party and announce your intention to marry a woman you do not know." "And yet I have." He tilted his head slightly, studying her with the detached interest of a scientist examining a specimen. "I require a wife. You require an escape from Mr. Pemberton's sweaty palms, I believe you said. This seems an efficient solution to both problems." "Efficient?" Rosalind repeated faintly. "I am nothing if not efficient." He held out his hand. Not to shake, the gesture was too formal, too deliberate for that. He was offering to lead her into the garden, into the full view of society, into a situation she could not easily escape. "Walk with me, Lady Rosalind. We have much to discuss." She should refuse. Every instinct she possessed was screaming at her to refuse, to laugh off his bizarre proposal, to retreat into the safety of the wisteria tunnel and pretend this entire encounter had never happened. But something in his eyes stopped her, something beneath the ice, glimpsed only for an instant before it vanished again. He was serious, completely, impossibly serious. And she, for all her wit and her words and her carefully constructed armor, could not think of a single thing to say that would make him go away. She took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, and even through their gloves she felt the shock of it, the unexpected warmth beneath the cold exterior, the strength carefully restrained. He tucked her hand into the crook of his arm and began walking, leaving Helena standing open-mouthed by the wisteria and leading Rosalind directly into the centre of Lady Hartwell's garden party. Whispers erupted in their wake, like birds startled from a hedge. The Duke of Ashworth was walking with a woman. Not just any woman, Lady Rosalind Blackwell, the sharp-tongued spinster who had failed to secure a match for 5 consecutive seasons. And he was not merely walking with her. His hand was covering hers on his arm, a possessive gesture that society would interpret in only one way. "You are ruining me," Rosalind said quietly, not looking at him. "On the contrary, I am saving you." His voice was pitched low, meant only for her ears. "Your reputation will be enhanced, not damaged by my attention. I am a duke. My interest elevates anyone it touches." "Your interest?" Is that what this is? It is what it will appear to be. He steered her toward a secluded corner of the garden, away from the most obvious eavesdroppers. In reality, this is a practical arrangement. I require a duchess, you require an escape. Neither of us will be disappointed, because neither of us will expect anything from the other. They stopped near a stone wall covered in climbing roses, the heavy blooms providing some measure of privacy. Rosalind extracted her hand from his arm and turned to face him, finally allowing herself to study him properly. Up close, the severity of his features was almost overwhelming all sharp angles and cold surfaces, like a sculpture that had never been warmed by human hands. "Why me?" she asked bluntly. "Of all the eligible women in London, many of whom are younger, prettier, and far better behaved, why would you choose me based on an overheard joke?" He regarded her with that same clinical detachment. "Because you do not want to marry me." Rosalind blinked. "That is your qualification?" "It is the only one that matters." He clasped his hands behind his back, his posture so rigid it seemed painful. "I have no interest in a wife who harbors romantic expectations. No interest in a marriage built on feeling or sentiment or any of the other dangerous foolishness that destroys otherwise sensible people. I require a duchess who will perform her duties without demanding anything beyond material comfort and social position. Your obvious reluctance suggests you are uniquely suited to such an arrangement." "My obvious reluctance," Rosalind repeated slowly, "is to marriage in general, not to you specifically." "Nevertheless. And my wit, my sharp tongue, my hedgehog prickliness?" She threw his own coldness back at him, a defensive reflex she couldn't quite suppress. "Those do not concern you?" For the first time, something that might have been amusement flickered across his face there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "I have withstood far worse than wit, Lady Rosalind, and I have no need of a wife who agrees with everything I say. Such women are tedious beyond endurance." "Then what do you need?" "I have told you. A duchess, someone of appropriate breeding and adequate reputation, who will provide an heir and maintain my household without requiring my emotional engagement." He said it flatly, as if describing a position of employment rather than a marriage. "In return, you will have a title, a fortune, complete freedom within the bounds of propriety, and protection from Mr. Pemberton and anyone like him for the rest of your life." Rosalind was quiet for a moment, her mind racing. It was absurd. The entire situation was absurd. A duke proposing marriage based on an overheard joke, offering her everything she needed while demanding nothing she couldn't give. It was too convenient, too perfectly tailored to her desperation, which meant there had to be a catch. "Why do you need a wife so urgently?" she asked. "You have avoided marriage for over a decade. What has changed?" Something shuttered behind his eyes, a door slamming closed. "That is not your concern. If you wish me to consider your proposal, it absolutely is my concern." He stared at her, and she had the unsettling sense that he was reassessing her, recalculating something in that cold mind of his. "Very well," he said finally. "My grandmother, the Dowager Duchess, is unwell. She has made it clear that she wishes to see me wed before she dies, and I find myself unwilling to deny her final request. Additionally, my younger brother and current heir is a wastrel of the First Order who will gamble away the Ashworth legacy within a year of inheriting. I require an heir of my own to prevent that outcome." "So I am to be a broodmare. You are to be a duchess." His voice sharpened slightly, the first crack in his glacial composure. "There is a significant difference, but yes, the production of an heir is among your expected duties. I would think that obvious." Rosalind looked away, toward the roses climbing the stone wall. Their scent was overwhelming, cloying, almost suffocating. She thought of her father's ultimatum, of Pemberton's wet eyes and wandering hands, of her mother's endless disappointment. She thought of screaming into pillows for the rest of her life. "And if I agree," she said quietly, "what then? We marry, I provide your heir, and we spend the rest of our lives as strangers sharing a household? Would you prefer otherwise?" The question caught her off guard. She looked back at him, searching his face for mockery, for cruelty, for anything that would help her understand him, but his expression remained impenetrable, a fortress with the drawbridge raised. "I don't know what I prefer," she admitted. "I stopped thinking about preferences somewhere around my 3rd season, when it became clear that my preferences were irrelevant to my fate." "Then consider this. With me, your preferences will be entirely your own." He moved slightly closer, not threatening but deliberate, ensuring she understood the weight of his words. "I will not attempt to change you, Lady Rosalind. I will not sand down your edges or silence your wit, or demand that you become less than you are. I require only discretion in public and cooperation in private. Beyond that, you may be as sharp and clever and inconvenient as you please." It was, Rosalind realized, the strangest proposal she could have imagined. Not romantic, not passionate, not even particularly kind. But it was honest, ruthlessly, bleakly honest, in a way she had never encountered in 5 years of navigating society's endless games. "I need time to consider," she said. "You do not have time." His voice was flat, not cruel, but factual. "Tomorrow, the gossip from today will have spread through every drawing-room in London. The Duke of Ashworth approached Lady Rosalind Blackwell at Lady Hartwell's garden party and held an extended private conversation. By afternoon, speculation will be rampant. By evening, expectations will be fixed. If I do not call on your father tomorrow morning with an offer, your reputation will suffer from my attention rather than benefit from it." "Then why did you approach me so publicly?" "Because you made your desperation public first." He raised an eyebrow, the first real expression she had seen on his face. "I merely took advantage of the opportunity you provided. That is manipulative. That is practical. I do not have time for a lengthy courtship, Lady Rosalind. My grandmother is dying. My brother is waiting to inherit and destroy everything my family has built over centuries. And you—" His gaze swept over her, assessing. "You are running out of options and too proud to accept the ones available to you. We are both, it seems, somewhat desperate. Shall we be desperate together?" Rosalind laughed before she could stop herself, a genuine laugh, surprised out of her by the sheer audacity of his proposal. "That is perhaps the least romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. I have never been accused of romance." He didn't quite smile, but something around his eyes softened almost imperceptibly. "Do we have an understanding?" She should say no. Every rational part of her mind was insisting that she should say no, thank him for his peculiar offer, and retreat to the safety of uncertainty rather than commit to a life with this strange, cold, utterly unreadable man. But another part of her, the part that had spent 5 years fighting and losing, the part that was so terribly tired of being too much and not enough, whispered that this was the escape she had dreamed of. Not happiness, perhaps, but freedom of a kind. "If I accept," she said slowly, "there will be conditions." "Name them." "I will not be treated as a possession. I may have to marry for practical reasons, but I will not become invisible inside my own household. You will be the Duchess of Ashworth. Invisibility would be impossible even if I desired it. And I want—" She hesitated, unsure how to articulate the formless yearning that had lived inside her for as long as she could remember. "I want to be seen, not just as a duchess, not just as a producer of heirs, but as a person. I have spent my entire life being told I am too much, and I am tired of trying to be less. If you cannot accept me as I am, all of me, including the parts that are sharp and difficult and inconvenient, then this arrangement will fail before it begins." He was silent for a long moment, studying her with those winter-grey eyes. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before, though no warmer. "I cannot promise to love you, Lady Rosalind. That capacity was removed from me long ago, if it ever existed at all. But I can promise to see you, to treat you with the respect your position demands, and the honesty your nature deserves. Will that suffice?" It would have to. It was more than she had expected, more than she had dared to hope for from any man. And it was certainly more than Horace Pemberton would ever offer. "Yes," she said, and felt something shift inside her, a door opening onto an unfamiliar path. "I believe it will." The Duke of Ashworth nodded once, sharply, as if concluding a business negotiation. "Then I will call upon your father tomorrow morning. I suggest you prepare him for my visit. The Earl struck me as a man who does not appreciate surprises. You've met my father?" "Once, briefly, at a House of Lords session. He attempted to engage me in conversation about taxation reform. I was not receptive." He offered his arm again, formal and correct. "Shall I return you to your friend Mrs. Ashby? I believe she has been attempting to murder me with her eyes for the past several minutes." Rosalind looked across the garden to where Helena stood, her expression a complicated mixture of alarm and fascination. Their extended private conversation had not gone unnoticed by the rest of the party either. The whispers had coalesced into open staring, and Rosalind could practically see the gossip spreading like fire through dry grass. "The damage is done, I suppose," she murmured. "No, the foundation is laid." He began walking, and she had no choice but to accompany him. "There is a difference." They crossed the garden in full view of society, the Duke of Ashworth and his unlikely conquest. Rosalind held her head high, refusing to cringe beneath the weight of curious eyes. If she was to be a spectacle, she would at least be a dignified one. Helena met them at the wisteria entrance, her face a careful mask that did not quite conceal her concern. "Your Grace, you return my friend unscathed." "I have no interest in scathing, Mrs. Ashby. That would require emotional investment." He released Rosalind's arm with precise courtesy. "I will call tomorrow, Lady Rosalind. I trust you will be prepared." "I am rarely prepared for anything, Your Grace. It is one of my many deficiencies." For just an instant, so briefly, she might have imagined it, something flickered in his eyes. Not warmth, exactly, but something approaching interest. Then it vanished, replaced by his customary coldness. "Until tomorrow," he said, and walked away. Rosalind and Helena stood in silence, watching the Duke's rigid form cut through the crowd. Guests parted before him like the Red Sea before Moses, no one daring to impede his progress. "What?" Helena said finally, her voice faint. "Just happened?" "I believe," Rosalind replied, her own voice not much steadier, "I have just become engaged to the Duke of Ashworth." "You cannot be serious." "I rarely am, and yet—" Helena grabbed her arm and pulled her into the wisteria tunnel, away from the eager ears that had already begun drifting closer. "Rosalind, you cannot marry that man. He is, they call him, the Ice Duke for a reason. He has never shown interest in any woman. There are rumors that he is incapable of human feeling. He was perfectly clear about that himself. And that doesn't concern you." Rosalind leaned against the stone wall, suddenly exhausted. The afternoon's events were catching up with her. The wild swing from despair to reckless jest, to impossible engagement, leaving her dizzy and unmoored. "He was honest," she said quietly. "Helena, he was the first man in 5 years to speak to me honestly. He didn't pretend to be charmed by my wit or intrigued by my spirit. He didn't promise me romance or passion or any of the lies that suitors usually tell. He looked at me, saw exactly who I am, and decided I was exactly what he needed. Because you don't want him. He said as much. Yes. Rosalind closed her eyes. Because I don't want him. Because I won't expect anything from him. Because I am safe precisely because he believes I cannot be hurt by his coldness. She opened her eyes and met Helena's worried gaze. Perhaps he is right. Perhaps a marriage built on mutual indifference is better than one built on false promises. At least we will both know exactly what we are getting. Rosalind, I am tired, Helena. The words emerged broken, stripped of her usual defenses. I am so tired of hoping, tired of being disappointed, tired of my mother's looks and my father's ultimatums, and society's endless judgment. The Duke of Ashworth is offering me an escape, not a happy ending, not a love match, but an escape. And God help me, I am going to take it. Helena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was gentle. What if he hurts you? He has promised not to. He has promised not to love you. Those are not the same thing. Rosalind had no answer for that. She thought of his winter-grey eyes, of the momentary flicker she had glimpsed beneath the ice. She thought of his strange proposal, his brutal honesty, the way he had looked at her as if she were a puzzle to be solved rather than a person to be charmed. Perhaps not, she admitted, but it is the only offer I have, and it is better, far better than the alternative. The news reached her parents before she did. By the time Rosalind returned home, her mother was pacing the drawing-room in a state of agitation that might have been joy or horror. It was difficult to tell with the Countess, whose emotional range tended toward the extremes. "Is it true?" she demanded the moment Rosalind appeared. "The Duke of Ashworth? The Duke of Ashworth spoke to you privately for 20 minutes and is calling upon your father tomorrow. It would seem the gossip travels quickly. Lady Morton sent a note ahead." Her mother's hands were trembling, actually trembling, as she clutched the paper. "She says he walked you across the entire garden. She says he held your hand on his arm. She says, all true, I'm afraid." The Countess stared at her daughter as if seeing a stranger. "How? How did you manage this? Every eligible woman in London has tried to capture his attention, and you, with your sharp tongue and your difficult nature. He seems to prefer difficult natures. Do not be flippant." Her mother sat down heavily, as if her legs would no longer support her. "The Duke of Ashworth, one of the highest titles in England, one of the largest fortunes, and he is calling upon your father tomorrow to discuss terms for marriage to you. That appears to be the sequence of events, yes." Her mother looked up, and Rosalind was startled to see tears in her eyes. Not disappointment, not frustration, but something that might almost be hope. "I did not think." The Countess stopped, collected herself. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. "I had given up, Rosalind. After this season, I had accepted that we would have to proceed with Mr. Pemberton's suit. Your father's debts, the situation is worse than you know. Pemberton was our only option. I am aware of the situation. You are not." Her mother shook her head. "There are debts even I don't fully understand. Your father has been reckless, desperate. Pemberton offered to settle everything in exchange for your hand, and we had no choice but to consider it." Rosalind felt cold wash through her. "Then my marriage to the Duke changes everything." Her mother rose and crossed to her, taking Rosalind's hands in hers, a gesture of affection so rare that it made Rosalind's throat tighten. "A duchess! My daughter! A duchess! With access to one of the great fortunes of England. Your father's debts will be nothing against the Ashworth resources. We will be saved, Rosalind, all of us, because of you." It was not, Rosalind thought, the most romantic reason to marry. But it was honest. Perhaps that was what she valued now, honesty over romance, security over passion. Perhaps that was all that was left to value. "Mother," she said carefully, "you should know that the Duke is not... He is not an affectionate man. This will not be a love match. Love matches are for novels and foolish girls." The Countess squeezed her hands, her expression practical and unromantic as ever. "What matters is position, security, protection. Love is a luxury, and we have never been wealthy enough for luxuries." She paused, studying Rosalind's face. "Can you do it? Can you live with a man who offers you everything except his heart?" Rosalind thought of the wisteria tunnel, of her wild declaration, of the Duke's winter eyes and his uncompromising honesty. "I believe," she said slowly, "that his heart was never part of the offer. And perhaps that is for the best." Her father received the Duke the next morning at precisely 10 o'clock. Rosalind was not invited to the meeting, of course. Such negotiations were conducted between men, concerning the transfer of property and title and expectations, as if the bride herself were merely another asset to be listed in a ledger. She waited in the morning room, embroidery untouched in her lap, ears straining for any sound from the study down the hall. Helena arrived at 10:30, having apparently decided that propriety could not prevent her from offering moral support. She sat beside Rosalind and took her hand without speaking, and they waited together as the clock ticked away minutes that felt like hours. At 11, the study door opened. Rosalind heard the low rumble of male voices, the decisive cadence of her father's, the colder precision of the Duke's. Footsteps in the hallway, her heart hammering against her ribs. The morning room door opened, and the Duke of Ashworth entered. He looked exactly as he had the day before, immaculately dressed, rigidly postured, his face revealing nothing. He glanced at Helena with brief acknowledgment, before fixing his gaze on Rosalind. "Lady Rosalind, your father has accepted my suit. We are to be married in 3 weeks' time by special license." 3 weeks. She had expected longer, had thought there would be time to adjust, to prepare, to come to terms with this strange bargain she had made. But of course he had mentioned urgency. His grandmother dying, his brother waiting to inherit. Everything rushed, everything practical, everything stripped of the softness that other brides might have expected. 3 weeks, she repeated. "I see no reason for delay. My grandmother wishes to attend, and her health is uncertain. The license has been procured. The ceremony will be held at St. George's, the reception at Ashworth House. Following that, we will retire to Ashworth Park in Kent for an undetermined period." He delivered this information like a military commander delivering orders, efficient, impersonal, expecting compliance. "I see," Rosalind said, and was proud that her voice did not waver. "Am I to have any input into these arrangements, or have they all been decided for me?" Something flickered in his eyes, that same brief spark she had seen yesterday. "The details of the ceremony may be altered according to your preferences, within reason. The timing is non-negotiable." "And if I have changed my mind?" Beside her, Helena inhaled sharply. The Duke went very still. "Have you," he asked quietly, "changed your mind?" Rosalind held his gaze, searching for any sign of concern, disappointment, anger. She found nothing. His face remained impenetrable, his eyes revealing only that strange, assessing intelligence that seemed to calculate everything and feel nothing. "No," she said finally. "I merely wished to know whether the option remained available." "It does." He clasped his hands behind his back. "Until the ceremony is complete, you may withdraw at any time. I would prefer, however, that you inform me before the guests arrive at the church. It would be inconvenient to explain your absence at the altar. How considerate of you. I am nothing if not practical. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Lady Rosalind, one matter I failed to mention yesterday. My grandmother, the Dowager Duchess, has expressed a wish to meet you before the wedding. She will be travelling to London next week. I trust you will make yourself available. I am at her Grace's disposal. Good. He nodded once, a gesture that managed to convey dismissal, acknowledgement, and completion of business all at once. I will call again in 2 days to discuss the particulars. Good morning, Lady Rosalind. Mrs. Ashby. And he was gone. Rosalind stared at the doorway through which he had disappeared, listening to his footsteps recede down the hallway, to the front door opening and closing, to the silence that followed. "Well," Helena said faintly, "he is certainly decisive." "He is certainly something." Rosalind rose abruptly and crossed to the window, watching as the Duke's carriage pulled away from the curb. She caught a glimpse of his profile through the window, stern, cold, as distant as the moon, before the carriage rounded the corner and vanished. In 3 weeks, that man would be her husband. She would bear his name, live in his house, share his bed until she produced the heir he required. And then, what? Separate lives under the same roof, he had said. A marriage of convenience in truth as well as name. It was exactly what she had agreed to. Exactly what she had asked for. So why did she feel, suddenly, as though she had made a terrible mistake? The Dowager Duchess arrived in London 6 days later, and Rosalind was summoned to Ashworth House for the inspection. That was how she thought of it, an inspection, like a horse being evaluated for purchase. She dressed carefully, choosing a gown of sage green that her mother had once reluctantly admitted suited her colouring. She practised neutral expressions in the mirror, then abandoned the effort when she realized she was incapable of neutrality. The Ashworth townhouse was a monument to old wealth and older power, its stone facade looming over the street with dignified severity. Rosalind was shown to a sitting room on the first floor, where she expected to find the Duke waiting to make introductions. Instead, she found only an old woman. The Dowager Duchess sat in a chair by the fire, wrapped in shawls despite the warmth of the day. She was small, shrunken by age and illness, but her eyes were bright and sharp, taking Rosalind's measure with an intelligence that reminded her, uncomfortably, of her grandson. "Come in, girl. Don't hover in the doorway like a ghost." Rosalind obeyed, crossing to stand before the Dowager's chair. She curtsied deeply. "Your Grace, it is an honor to meet you." "Is it? I imagine it's more nerve-wracking than honorable. Sit down. There." The Dowager gestured to a chair across from her. "Let me look at you properly." Rosalind sat, folding her hands in her lap and allowing herself to be examined. The Dowager's gaze moved over her face, her posture, her dress, lingering on details that Rosalind could not guess. "You're not a beauty," the old woman said finally. "I am aware." "Good. Beauties are tedious. They expect to be admired and cannot comprehend why the world does not organize itself around their pleasures." The Dowager shifted in her chair, wincing slightly pain, Rosalind realized, that she was trying to hide. "Sebastian tells me you have a sharp tongue. Is that true?" "I have been told so, Your Grace, frequently and with disapproval." "Show me." Rosalind blinked. "I beg your pardon?" "Show me your sharp tongue. Say something clever. I am old and dying and bored beyond endurance. The least you can do is entertain me." For a moment, Rosalind was completely at a loss. Then, almost against her will, a smile tugged at her lips. "Very well. Your grandson proposed to me based on an overheard joke, expecting nothing and offering less. He has the emotional range of a garden statue and the conversational warmth of a February fog. I have agreed to marry him anyway, because my alternatives were worse, and because I am too tired to keep fighting for something better." She met the dowager's gaze steadily. "Is that sharp enough for your grace?" The old woman stared at her. For a terrible moment Rosalind thought she had gone too far, that she had destroyed everything with her unstoppable honesty. Then the dowager laughed. It was a rusty sound, as if she had not used it in some time, but genuine. "Oh, excellent. You will do very well." "I what?" "You will do very well," the dowager repeated. "For Sebastian. He needs someone who will not let him retreat into his fortress, someone who will poke at his walls until they crack." She leaned forward, her eyes bright with something that might have been hope. "He was not always like this, you know, cold, frozen. He was a warm child, a loving young man. And then—" She stopped, something closing off in her expression. "And then?" Rosalind prompted gently. "That is his story to tell, if he ever chooses to tell it." The dowager settled back in her chair. "What I will tell you is this. Sebastian believes he does not feel. He has convinced himself that he is incapable of emotion, that love and warmth and connection are weaknesses he has successfully excised. He is wrong." "How can you be sure?" "Because he agreed to marry you." The dowager smiled, a sad, knowing smile that made her look every one of her years. "He could have chosen anyone. Any of the simpering debutantes who throw themselves at him each season, who would have been grateful for his title and asked nothing more. Instead, he chose you, a woman who challenged him, who demanded honesty, who made him laugh." "He did not laugh." "Not visibly. But I know my grandson, Lady Rosalind. Something about you reached past his defenses, even if only for a moment. That is why he chose you. Not because you are convenient, but because you are dangerous." Rosalind absorbed this in silence, unsure what to make of it. The idea that she prickly, difficult, too much Rosalind could be dangerous to anyone seemed absurd, and yet— She thought of that flicker in his eyes, that momentary softening when she had made him laugh. "What if you are wrong? If—" she asked quietly. "What if he truly is incapable of feeling anything? What if I spend my life waiting for warmth that never comes?" The dowager reached out and took Rosalind's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "Then you will have lost nothing," she said, "because you are already prepared for coldness. You have already accepted the worst he has to offer. But if I am right, if there is still something human buried beneath all that ice, then you might gain everything." She squeezed Rosalind's fingers. "I am dying, child. I have perhaps weeks left, perhaps months. I will not live to see whether this marriage flourishes or fails, but I wanted to meet you. I wanted to see for myself whether Sebastian had chosen wisely." "And has he?" The dowager smiled again, warmer this time. "I believe he has chosen better than he knows." The wedding was held 3 weeks to the day after the Duke's proposal. Rosalind stood at the altar of St. George's, Hanover Square, surrounded by flowers she had not chosen, wearing a gown her mother had selected, about to speak vows that had been written centuries before either she or her groom existed. The Duke of Ashworth stood beside her in immaculate black, his face as unreadable as ever, his responses to the minister's questions clear and cold as winter water. She said her own vows in a voice that barely trembled. She felt his hand close around hers, cool even through their gloves. She watched his face as the minister pronounced them man and wife, searching for any sign of emotion. Relief, resignation, even regret. There was nothing. His expression remained carved from stone. The reception was a blur of congratulations and champagne, of society's elite pretending to be happy for her while speculating behind their fans about how the sharp-tongued spinster had managed to catch the uncatchable Duke. Rosalind smiled until her face ached, accepted well-wishes she did not believe, and avoided looking at her new husband whenever possible. He did the same. When the interminable party finally ended, they entered the carriage that would take them to Ashworth Park. The door closed, sealing them into silence, and the horses began to move. Rosalind watched London slide past the window, the familiar streets she would not see again for months, perhaps years. She was no longer Lady Rosalind Blackwell. She was the Duchess of Ashworth, wife of a man she barely knew, travelling toward a life she could not imagine. "We will maintain separate schedules." She startled at his voice, the first words he had spoken to her since their vows. He was watching her with those winter-grey eyes, his expression neutral but intent. "Separate schedules," she repeated. "I rise early. You may sleep as late as you wish. My study and the estate offices are private. All other rooms are at your disposal. Dinner will be served at 8. We may dine together or separately, as circumstances dictate. My grandmother resides in the Dower House and will welcome your company. I am sure—" He paused, something flickering briefly in his expression. "You will have complete freedom, as I promised. This marriage need not be more confining than you allow it to be." Rosalind turned from the window to face him fully. In the dim light of the carriage, his features seemed softer, somehow the sharp edges blurred, the coldness less absolute. Or perhaps she was simply imagining what she wanted to see. "And the air you require?" she asked quietly. "How does that factor into our separate schedules?" His jaw tightened, the first real reaction she had seen from him all day. "That matter can wait. I see no reason to rush into arrangements that make either of us uncomfortable." "How considerate of you." "I have been called many things, lady—" He stopped, corrected himself. "Your Grace. Considerate is rarely among them." "And yet you have just been considerate." She tilted her head, studying him. "Perhaps there is hope for you after all." That flicker again, there and gone, a flash of something almost human behind the ice. "I would not wager on it, madam. My capacity for improvement is notoriously limited." The carriage rolled on through the darkening countryside, carrying them toward their new life. Rosalind sat in silence, watching her husband's profile against the window, wondering what lay beneath those frozen walls, wondering if she would ever find out, wondering, for the first time, if she wanted to. When the lights of Ashworth Park finally appeared on the horizon, a great golden glow against the purple sky, Sebastian spoke again. "Welcome home, Your Grace." Home. Rosalind tasted the word, found it strange on her tongue. She had never felt at home anywhere, not really. Not in her father's house, where she had always been too much. Not in London's ballrooms, where she had never been enough. Could she find home here, in this grand estate, with this cold and distant man? She did not know. But as the carriage swept up the drive and the massive house loomed before them, she found herself hoping, despite everything, against all reason, that perhaps she could. Perhaps they both could. Ashworth Park rose from the Kent countryside like a monument to centuries of accumulated power, its pale stone facade stretching endlessly in both directions, its windows glittering in the morning light like 100 watchful eyes. Rosalind stood at the window of her private sitting room. Her sitting room, though she still could not quite believe it, and tried to reconcile herself to the fact that this was now her home. 3 weeks had passed since her arrival. 3 weeks of learning the labyrinthine corridors and the names of servants who materialized silently to anticipate her every need. 3 weeks of dinners eaten in near silence across a table long enough to seat 30, her husband's face distant and unreadable at the far end. 3 weeks of separate schedules, separate lives, separate everything. She had not seen Sebastian alone since their wedding. Night and that encounter had been mercifully brief, nothing more than a formal good night at the door of her chambers before he disappeared into the master suite adjoining hers, A door connected their rooms. It had remained firmly closed on both sides. "Your Grace?" Rosalind turned to find Mrs. Pemberton, no relation to the odious Horace, thank heaven, hovering in the doorway. The housekeeper was a sturdy woman of middle years, with iron-grey hair and an expression of perpetual efficiency that Rosalind found both intimidating and oddly comforting. "Yes, Mrs. Pemberton? Her Grace, the Dowager, has sent word that she would welcome your company for tea this afternoon, if you are not otherwise engaged." Rosalind suppressed a bitter smile. Otherwise engaged. As if she had anything to occupy her time beyond wandering the endless halls of this beautiful prison, cataloguing paintings she did not understand and furniture she had not chosen. "Please inform Her Grace that I would be delighted." Mrs. Pemberton nodded and withdrew, leaving Rosalind alone once more with her thoughts and the vast, empty silence of Ashworth Park. The Dower House sat at the far edge of the estate's manicured gardens, a graceful building of warm brick that seemed almost cosy compared to the main house's imposing grandeur. Rosalind walked the gravel path through hedgerows of box and yew, breathing in the scent of late-blooming roses, and trying to quiet the restless anxiety that had become her constant companion. The Dowager received her in a small parlour overlooking a kitchen garden, the afternoon sun streaming through tall windows and illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden light. She looked frailer than she had in London, smaller somehow, diminished by the illness that was slowly claiming her, but her eyes remained bright and sharp, missing nothing. "Sit, child. You look as though you have been running from something." "Only my own thoughts, Your Grace." Rosalind settled into the chair across from the Dowager, accepting the cup of tea that a maid pressed into her hands. "They have become rather persistent company of late. Thoughts have a way of growing louder when we try to silence them." The Dowager sipped her own tea, her gaze steady on Rosalind's face. "Tell me, how are you finding married life?" The question was asked lightly, but Rosalind heard the genuine concern beneath it. She considered offering the polished reassurances that society would expect everything is wonderful. "The Duke is most attentive. I could not be happier." But something about this shrewd old woman made dishonesty feel impossible. "Quiet," she admitted. "Very quiet. I had not realized how much of my life consisted of noise until it was removed. Sebastian has always preferred silence. It is his armor, you understand. As long as he does not speak, he does not risk revealing anything. I am beginning to understand that, yes." The Dowager set down her teacup with a decisive clink. "And what do you intend to do about it?" Rosalind blinked. "I beg your pardon." "You heard me perfectly well. My grandson has spent 12 years building walls around himself, and you have been here 3 weeks doing nothing but respecting those walls. That may be very proper, but it is also very foolish." The old woman leaned forward, her eyes fierce despite her frailty. "He chose you, Rosalind. Out of all the women in London, he chose the one with a sharp tongue and a stubborn spirit. Why do you suppose that is? Because I expected nothing from him. Because you would not let him hide." The Dowager shook her head impatiently. "Sebastian thinks he wants a wife who will leave him alone. He is wrong. He wants someone who will force him to feel again, even if he has forgotten how to ask for it. You must be that someone, child, or this marriage will wither before it ever has a chance to bloom." Rosalind was silent for a long moment, turning the words over in her mind. Force him to feel again. It sounded exhausting, and possibly hopeless. Sebastian had made his preferences abundantly clear. He wanted a wife in name only, a duchess to perform the necessary social functions, a body to produce an heir. He had not asked for a companion, a confidant, a friend. But then he had also not asked for a wife who challenged him. And yet he had chosen her. "How?" she finally asked. How do I reach a man who has made an art of being unreachable?" The dowager smiled that same sad, knowing smile Rosalind remembered from their first meeting. "You begin by refusing to be ignored. You insert yourself into his life in ways he cannot anticipate or dismiss. You show him that you are not a convenience, but a person, with thoughts and feelings and needs that deserve his attention." She paused, her expression softening. "And you are patient, child, so very patient, because the ice did not form overnight, and it will not melt overnight either. The first step," Rosalind decided, was to stop being invisible. She began with small incursions, appearing in rooms where Sebastian might be, at times when their separate schedules might accidentally overlap. She joined him for breakfast one morning, arriving early enough to catch him before he retreated to his study, and was rewarded with a look of such pure startlement that she nearly laughed. "Good morning, Your Grace." She settled into the chair across from him, helping herself to toast and eggs from the sideboard with deliberate casualness. "I find I have grown weary of eating alone. I trust you do not object to company." He stared at her for a long moment, his newspaper frozen mid-turn. "I was not aware that you rose this early. I have been persuaded to adjust my habits." She bit into her toast, meeting his gaze without flinching. "The country air seems to agree with me. I find myself restless if I remain in bed past 7. Something flickered in his expression, confusion perhaps, or suspicion. But he said nothing more, merely returning his attention to his newspaper with a slight furrow between his brows. Rosalind counted it as a victory. She expanded her campaign over the following days. She appeared in the library when he was reading, settling into a chair with her own book, and refusing to acknowledge his pointed silence. She walked the gardens at times when she knew he often did the same, offering pleasant commentary on the weather that he had no choice but to respond to without seeming unutterably rude. She asked questions about the estate, the tenants, the farming practices, the history of the house, questions that required more than monosyllabic answers. At first, Sebastian seemed merely bewildered by her sudden ubiquity. He answered her questions with clipped precision, tolerated her presence at breakfast with stiff courtesy, and generally behaved as though she were a somewhat puzzling house guest who had overstayed her welcome. But gradually, almost imperceptibly, something began to shift. It started with the servants. Rosalind had never been comfortable with the rigid hierarchy that governed great houses, the careful distance maintained between masters and those who served them. She found herself chatting with the maids who tended her rooms, asking after the health of the cook's ailing mother, remembering the name of the young footman whose sister had just been married. Small kindnesses, the sort of human connections that came naturally to her, but were apparently unprecedented in the Ashworth household. Word spread, as she had known it would, and Sebastian, who kept closer watch on his household than he pretended, began to notice. "I understand you have been visiting the kitchens." Rosalind looked up from her book. She had chosen the library again today, as she did most afternoons, to find Sebastian standing in the doorway. He had not entered without announcement since their wedding. This small breach of protocol felt significant somehow. "I have," she agreed. "Mrs. Finch makes the most extraordinary scones, and I wished to tell her so directly. It seemed more personal than relaying my compliments through half a dozen intermediaries. That is not how things are done. So I have been informed." She turned a page, not looking at him. "I have also been informed that my behavior is confusing the staff, who are unaccustomed to courtesy from their employers. I find that rather sad, don't you?" She heard rather than saw him enter the room, his footsteps measured on the polished floor. He stopped somewhere behind her chair, close enough that she could feel his presence, like a change in the air pressure. "You are disrupting the household routines." "I am establishing new ones." She finally looked up, twisting in her chair to meet his gaze. "You told me I would have complete freedom within this house. I am exercising that freedom." "I did not expect you to exercise it in the kitchens." "Then perhaps you should have been more specific." She smiled, the expression sharper than she intended. "But I suspect the real objection is not where I am exercising my freedom, but that I am exercising it at all. You expected me to remain quietly in my rooms, emerging only for dinners and official functions. You expected me to be decorative and unobtrusive, like another piece of furniture." His jaw tightened, that familiar tension that meant she had struck too close to the truth. "I expected you to behave with appropriate dignity for a Duchess of Ashworth." "And have I not? I have been courteous to your staff, engaged with the management of your household, and made myself agreeable to your grandmother. I fail to see how any of this falls short of ducal dignity." For a long moment he simply stared at her. She watched the struggle playing out behind his eyes, the desire to put her in her place, warring with the inconvenient truth that she had committed no actual transgression. "You are not what I expected," he finally said. "No," Rosalind agreed. "I imagine I am not. The question is whether you will come to consider that a blessing or a curse." She returned her attention to her book, leaving the question hanging in the air between them. After a moment she heard his footsteps retreat, the library door closing softly behind him. But the next morning, when she appeared at breakfast, the furrow between his brows had softened into something that might almost have been curiosity. The dowager's health continued to decline as autumn deepened into an early winter. Rosalind visited her daily now, spending hours in the cosy parlour of the dower house, while the old woman slept or talked or simply held her hand in silence. There was something peaceful about it, a respite from the constant effort of breaching Sebastian's defences, and Rosalind found herself growing genuinely fond of this fierce, dying woman who had welcomed her with more warmth than her own mother ever had. "You are good to come so often," the dowager said one grey afternoon, rain streaking the windows. "Most young brides would find better uses for their time." "Most young brides have husbands who speak to them." Rosalind refilled the dowager's teacup, adding precisely 2 lumps of sugar, as she had learned she preferred. "I find I am rather starved for conversation." "Sebastian still keeps his distance?" "Sebastian still keeps everything at a distance. I have managed to infiltrate his breakfast table and his library, but anything beyond that remains firmly barricaded." She sighed, setting down the teapot. "I begin to wonder if your grandson is simply incapable of human connection, regardless of what either of us wishes." The dowager shook her head slowly. "I told you it would take patience." "Yes, but you did not tell me how much. I have been here 2 months, Your Grace. 2 months of inserting myself into his life, of refusing to be ignored, of waiting for some crack in his armour. And still he looks at me as though I am a particularly persistent puzzle he cannot quite solve. That is progress." "Is it? Because from where I sit, it feels rather more like stagnation." The old woman was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant, lost in memories Rosalind could not access. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, touched with a sorrow that made Rosalind's chest ache. "Sebastian was not always like this. When he was young before Catherine, before all of it, he was the warmest of my grandchildren. Quick to laugh, quick to love, quick to trust. His mother's death wounded him, certainly, but he healed from that. It was what came later that froze him." Rosalind leaned forward, hungry for any insight into the enigma she had married. "Catherine, his first betrothed, the carriage accident." The dowager looked at her sharply. "Who told you about Catherine?" "Lord Marcus, at a dinner some weeks ago. He mentioned it in passing that Sebastian had been engaged before to a woman who died." Marcus should learn to hold his tongue. But there was no real anger in the dowager's voice, only weariness. Yes, Catherine. Catherine Ashby, Helena's sister-in-law by marriage. She was everything Sebastian thought he wanted. Gentle, sweet, adoring. She looked at him as though he had hung the moon, and he was young enough to believe that was the same as love. What happened? The accident. The dowager closed her eyes. 3 days before the wedding. Sebastian had insisted on travelling to view a property. Despite the weather, there had been storms. The roads were dangerous, but he was impatient. Young and arrogant, and so certain that nothing could touch him or anyone he loved. A tear escaped, trailing down the papery cheek. The carriage overturned. Catherine was killed instantly. Sebastian was thrown clear, barely a scratch on him. He has never forgiven himself. Rosalind sat in silence, absorbing the weight of this revelation. Sebastian's coldness, his rigidity, his absolute refusal to feel, suddenly it all made terrible sense. He believed himself a murderer. He believed that his love had killed the woman he intended to marry. And he had spent 12 years punishing himself, freezing himself, ensuring that he would never love again, because loving meant destroying. He blamed himself, she said quietly. He still blames himself. He believes that caring for someone makes them vulnerable to his recklessness, his impatience, his failures. So he refuses to care. He keeps everyone at arm's length because he believes that is the kindest thing he can do to protect them from himself. That is... Rosalind searched for the right word. That is the saddest thing I have ever heard. It is why I hoped he would marry. The dowager opened her eyes, fixing Rosalind with an intent gaze. Not for heirs, not for duty, but for him. He has been half alive for 12 years, and I could not bear to leave this world knowing he would remain that way forever. When I saw you, when I saw how you refused to back down, how you met his coldness with fire, I believed you might be the one to thaw him. And if I cannot, then at least you will have tried, and you will have given an old woman hope in her final days. The dowager reached out, her thin fingers closing around Rosalind's wrist. Do not give up on him, child. Not yet. The ice is cracking, even if he does not know it. I can see it when he speaks of you, the confusion, the fascination, the fear. He feels more than he admits, even to himself. You must help him remember what that means. The storm that had been threatening all day finally broke that evening. Rosalind had chosen to dine alone in her sitting room, too unsettled by the dowager's revelations to maintain her campaign of cheerful intrusion. She sat by the fire, watching the flames dance, and thinking about Catherine Ashby, gentle, sweet, adoring Catherine, who had died because Sebastian was young and impatient, and so certain that nothing could touch him. She thought about the wall of ice that had grown up around him in the years since, the carefully constructed fortress of coldness that kept everyone at bay. She thought about his rigid posture, his expressionless face, the way his eyes sometimes flickered with something almost human before shuttering closed again. She thought about how tired it must be maintaining those walls, how exhausting to spend every moment guarding against the possibility of feeling anything. A knock at the door startled her from her reverie. "Come in." The door opened, and Sebastian stepped through. Rosalind rose automatically, surprise rippling through her. He had never come to her private rooms before, never crossed the boundary that separated their carefully segregated lives. Yet here he was, standing just inside her doorway, his expression as unreadable as ever, but his posture somehow different, less rigid, almost uncertain. "Your Grace," she said, "this is unexpected." I was informed you did not come down for dinner. His voice was clipped, but she thought she detected something beneath it. Concern, perhaps, or confusion. I came to ensure you are not unwell. I am perfectly well, thank you, merely tired. From your visit to my grandmother. It was not a question. Yes. Rosalind studied his face, searching for any sign of the wounded boy the dowager had described. We talked for some time. She told me about Catherine. The name landed like a physical blow. She watched Sebastian's entire body go rigid, watched the walls slam into place behind his eyes. My grandmother had no right. She had every right. She loves you. She worries about you. And she believed I should understand why my husband treats me like a stranger, despite the vows we exchanged. There is nothing to understand. His voice was ice. Catherine is dead. That chapter of my life is closed. It has no bearing on our arrangement. Our arrangement, Rosalind laughed, the sound hollow. Is that what we are calling this? An arrangement? A business transaction with conjugal obligations? It is what It is. Agreed to. Yes, it is. You were very clear that you wanted nothing from me beyond duty and discretion. You were very clear that you were incapable of feeling, that your heart was not part of the bargain. She stepped closer, close enough to see the tension in his jaw, the slight dilation of his pupils. But you were not honest about why. You did not tell me that you had frozen yourself in guilt for 12 years, convinced that loving someone means destroying them. You know nothing about it. I know what your grandmother told me. I know that you were engaged to a woman who adored you, and that she died because of a decision you made, and that you have punished yourself ever since. I know that you chose me because you believed I could not be hurt by your coldness, because I expected nothing, and would therefore demand nothing. Her voice cracked slightly on the next words. I know that you thought you were protecting me, protecting both of us, by ensuring that neither of us would ever feel anything. Sebastian said nothing. His face had gone pale, bloodless, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. But here is what you do not know, Rosalind continued, her heart hammering against her ribs. What your grandmother believes, and what I am beginning to suspect, is true. You are not protecting me by keeping me at arm's length. You are protecting yourself, because the alternative, allowing yourself to feel again, to care again, to risk again, terrifies you more than loneliness ever could. You presume too much. Perhaps, but I have nothing left to lose. She lifted her chin, meeting his frozen gaze without flinching. You have already told me not to expect love, not to expect warmth, not to expect anything beyond material comfort and social position. You have already made clear that you cannot give me what a wife might hope for from a husband. So what harm is there in speaking the truth? What damage can honesty do that has not already been done? The silence stretched between them, taut as a wire about to snap. Rosalind could hear the storm raging outside, the wind howling around the corners of the house, the rain lashing against the windows. But inside, in this room, there was only stillness. The frozen stillness of a man confronted with truths he had spent over a decade avoiding. When Sebastian finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. Catherine died because I loved her. Catherine died because of an accident, a terrible random accident that had nothing to do with love. I insisted we travel that day. She wanted to wait, wanted to let the storm pass. But I was impatient. I could not bear to postpone our plans, our future, our happiness, and because of my impatience, she is dead. That makes you human, not a murderer. Rosalind's own voice was gentler now, the anger fading into something closer to compassion. You made a decision that had unforeseeable consequences. That is not the same as killing her. It feels the same. I know. She reached out, slowly, carefully, giving him every chance to pull away. Her fingers touched his clenched fist, rested there lightly. "I know it does. But you cannot spend the rest of your life as a penance for a moment's impatience. You cannot freeze yourself forever because you are afraid of what might happen if you thaw." He looked down at her hand on his, and something in his expression shifted the ice cracking, just slightly, revealing the raw pain beneath. "I do not know how to be anything else," he said. "I have been cold for so long that I have forgotten what warmth feels like." "Then let me remind you." The words hung in the air between them, an offer and a challenge all at once. Rosalind felt her heart beating in her throat, felt the weight of everything she was risking. If he rejected her now, if he retreated behind his walls and slammed the door forever, but he didn't. Instead, slowly, hesitantly, his clenched fist uncurled. His fingers threaded through hers, cold at first, but warming slowly, and he let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. "I do not know how to do this," he said again, but this time the words sounded less like a refusal and more like a confession. "Neither do I." Rosalind squeezed his fingers gently. "But perhaps we can learn together." They stood like that for a long moment, hands intertwined, the storm raging outside while something quieter and more tentative stirred to life within. It was not a resolution, not a declaration, not the dramatic reconciliation that novels promised and life rarely delivered. But it was a beginning, and for now, that was enough. The morning after the storm dawned grey and gentle, the fury spent and replaced by a soft mist that veiled the gardens in mystery. Rosalind woke early, her sleep having been fitful, her mind churning with fragments of the previous night's conversation. Sebastian had left eventually, retreating to his own rooms with a formal good night that might have been discouraging had she not seen the way his hand lingered on hers before releasing it. He was not healed. She was not foolish enough to believe that one honest conversation could undo 12 years of careful freezing. But something had shifted between them. A door had opened, even if only a crack. She dressed simply and went down to breakfast, half expecting to find him absent, to discover that the daylight had restored his defences and returned them to the careful distance they had maintained before. But he was there. Seated at his usual place, newspaper in hand, he looked up when she entered, and for just a moment something warm flickered in those winter-grey eyes before the familiar mask descended. "Good morning," she said, taking her seat across from him. "Good morning." They ate in silence, but it was a different silence than before, less rigid, less intentional. He passed her the toast without being asked. She poured his tea exactly as he preferred it, having learned his habits, through weeks of careful observation. Small intimacies, the sort of unspoken communication that develops between people who are paying attention to each other. "I thought I might walk to the Dower House this morning," Rosalind said eventually. "Your grandmother was feeling poorly yesterday. I want to ensure she has recovered." Sebastian set down his newspaper, his expression shifting to something that might have been concern. "I had a message from her physician this morning. Her condition is declining." The words landed heavily. Rosalind set down her teacup, her appetite suddenly gone. "How quickly?" "He cannot say for certain. Weeks, perhaps. Perhaps less." Sebastian's voice was carefully controlled, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. "I should have visited her more often. I should have—" He stopped, his jaw working. "She knows you love her," Rosalind said gently. "She has told me so many times. She is not disappointed in you, Sebastian. She never has been." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw the fear beneath the ice, the terror of losing someone else, of watching helplessly while death claimed another person he loved. "Will you come with me?" he asked. "To see her today?" It was the first time he had asked her for anything, the first time he had acknowledged that he might need her presence, her support, her simple companionship. "Of course," she said. "Of course I will." They walked to the dower house together, the mist swirling around their feet, their arms occasionally brushing, but never quite touching. Sebastian was quiet, his face drawn, and Rosalind found herself fighting the urge to reach out, to take his hand as she had the night before. But that had been a moment of crisis, a breach of his defenses, born of vulnerability. In the cold light of morning, she was not certain the offer would be welcome. The dowager was propped up in her bed when they arrived, looking smaller and more fragile than ever, but still alert, her eyes sharpening when she saw them enter together. "Ah," she said, a faint smile crossing her lips. "I see you have finally started talking to each other." "Grandmother," Sebastian began. "Do not grandmother me in that tone. I am dying, not deaf." She gestured imperiously for them to sit, and they obeyed, settling into chairs on either side of her bed, like children called to account. "You look tired, both of you. I trust that means something interesting happened." "We talked," Rosalind said simply, "about Catherine, about the walls your grandson has built around himself." "Good." The dowager nodded, satisfaction briefly brightening her pale features. "I had hoped Rosalind would have the courage to confront you, Sebastian. You have been hiding for too long." "I have not been hiding. You have been hiding, and we both know it. You have been pretending that you are incapable of feeling because feeling is too painful to bear. And while I understand why, I cannot approve." She reached out, her thin hand finding Sebastian's. "You are my grandson, my blood. I have watched you freeze yourself for 12 years, and I have said nothing because I did not know how to reach you. But I am running out of time, and I cannot leave this world without telling you the truth." Sebastian's jaw tightened, but he did not pull away. "What truth?" "That Catherine would be ashamed of what you have become." The words were gentle, but they landed like blows. "She loved you, Sebastian. She loved your warmth, your passion, your capacity for joy. If she could see you now, cold, closed off, punishing yourself for an accident that was not your fault, she would weep. Not for herself, but for you. You do not know what she would think." "I know I do." The dowager's grip tightened on his hand. "I knew Catherine, Sebastian. I knew her better than you did, in some ways. She was not perfect. She was young, and sometimes foolish, and she put you on a pedestal that no man could sustain. But she was kind, and she was loving, and she would never, never have wanted you to spend your life as a penance for her death." Rosalind watched the struggle playing out across Sebastian's face, the guilt warring with grief, the frozen defenses cracking against the weight of his grandmother's words. She wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, but this was not her moment. This was between Sebastian and the woman who had known him longest, who had watched him become someone she barely recognized. "I killed her," Sebastian whispered. "No." The dowager shook her head firmly. "An accident killed her. A storm killed her. A driver who lost control killed her. You made a decision, an impatient, youthful decision. But you did not wrap your hands around her throat, Sebastian. You did not push her from the carriage. You were not even in the carriage when it happened. You had ridden ahead to speak with someone about the property. You were not there. I should have been there. And you would have died with her." The old woman's voice cracked. "Is that what you wish? That you had died too, leaving me with no grandchildren at all, leaving the title to Marcus, who would have gambled it away before your body was cold. Sometimes, yes, sometimes I wish that. The admission hung in the air, raw and terrible. Rosalind felt tears prick at her eyes, felt her heart break for this man who had spent 12 years wishing himself dead, because the alternative, living with guilt and grief, seemed unbearable. But the dowager only nodded, as if she had known, as if she had always known. "I understand," she said quietly. "I wished the same thing when my husband died, when your mother died. Grief makes us want to follow, to escape, to end the pain by any means necessary. But we are not given that choice, Sebastian. We are given only the choice of how to live with what remains. I do not know how to live without the walls." "Then learn." The dowager released his hand and turned to Rosalind, her gaze fierce and urgent. "Teach him. Show him. You have broken through once. You can do it again, and as many times as it takes until he remembers how to feel without being afraid." "Grandmother, I am dying, Sebastian." The words were calm, matter-of-fact, but they silenced him instantly. "I have perhaps weeks left, perhaps days. I will not be here to badger you into humanity. So I am asking no. I am begging the woman you married to do it for me, to refuse to let you retreat, to remind you every single day that you are worthy of love and capable of giving it." Rosalind looked at Sebastian, at the devastation written on his usually expressionless face, and made a decision. "I will," she said. "I promise." The Dowager Duchess of Ashworth died peacefully in her sleep 3 weeks later, on a crisp December morning when frost had painted the gardens silver. Rosalind was with her at the end, holding one thin hand while Sebastian held the other. They had taken turns through the long nights of her decline, sometimes together and sometimes alone, learning to share the weight of impending grief as they had not yet learned to share anything else. It was not romantic. It was too raw for romance, too urgent. But it was real. For the first time since their wedding, they were facing something together. Sebastian did not cry when his grandmother's breath finally stopped. He simply sat, frozen as always, staring at her peaceful face, as if unable to comprehend that she was gone. Rosalind closed the old woman's eyes gently, arranged her hands on the coverlet, and then turned to her husband. "Sebastian?" He did not respond. "Sebastian?" She moved around the bed, crouching beside his chair, so that she was in his line of sight. "She is gone." "I know." His voice was hollow, distant. "I know she is gone. Look at me." He did, slowly, and what Rosalind saw in his eyes made her breath catch. Not the familiar ice, the ice had melted, finally and completely, and what remained was naked grief, naked pain, the raw wound of a man who had just lost the last person in the world who truly knew him. "She loved you," Rosalind said softly. "She loved you more than anything, and her final wish was that you would let yourself be happy again. I do not know how. Then we will figure it out together." She reached up, her fingers brushing his cheek, feeling the faint dampness there, tears he probably did not even realize he was shedding. "I am not going anywhere, Sebastian. I promised her, and I promise you. Whatever happens now, you will not face it alone." He stared at her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or gratitude, or something deeper that neither of them had names for yet. And then, slowly, carefully, he reached out and pulled her into his arms. It was not a romantic embrace. It was desperate, almost clumsy, the awkward grip of a man who had forgotten how to seek comfort and was relearning in real time. But Rosalind held on, her arms wrapping around him, her face pressed against his shoulder, and she let him cling to her as the first real sobs shook his body. They stayed like that for a long time, while the fire burned low and the winter sun rose fully over Ashworth Park, while the household stirred into quiet mourning around them. Two people learning to lean on each other, learning to share grief instead of bearing it alone. It was not happiness. Not yet. But it was something. The funeral brought Marcus to Ashworth Park. Lord Marcus Cole swept into the house like a summer storm, bright, loud, impossible to ignore. He was everything Sebastian was not. Golden-haired where his brother was dark, quick to smile where Sebastian rarely moved his face at all, brimming with charm and careless warmth that seemed almost aggressive in the wake of the dowager's death. Rosalind disliked him immediately, or rather, she distrusted him, distrusted the easy manner that felt like performance, the concerned inquiries about Sebastian, that seemed more curious than caring, the way his eyes lingered on her a moment too long when they were introduced. "So, you are the miracle worker," he said, pressing a kiss to her hand that lasted several seconds longer than propriety allowed. "The woman who finally convinced my brother to take a bride. I confess, I had given up hope that he would ever find anyone willing to endure his company." "Your brother's company is perfectly pleasant," Rosalind replied coolly, extracting her hand, "when one makes the effort to know him properly." Marcus's eyebrows rose, amusement flickering across his handsome face. "A champion already. How refreshing. Most people find Sebastian rather difficult to champion." "Most people do not look closely enough." She walked away before he could respond, but she felt his gaze following her across the room, speculative, assessing, and when she glanced back, she caught something in his expression that made her uneasy. Not attraction, but calculation. As if he were measuring her, weighing her, trying to determine how she might be used. She mentioned it to Sebastian that evening, as they sat together in the library, a ritual they had developed in the weeks of his grandmother's decline, a nightly hour of shared silence that had gradually evolved into shared conversation. "Your brother makes me uncomfortable." Sebastian looked up from the book he was not really reading. "Marcus makes everyone uncomfortable. It is his particular gift." "No, this is different. He looks at me as if I am a piece on a chessboard, as if he is trying to determine my strategic value." "That is precisely what he is doing." Sebastian set the book aside, his expression darkening. "Marcus has never quite forgiven me for being born first. He had 12 years to hope that I would die without issue and leave him the title. Your presence and the potential for an heir has disrupted his plans. He seemed charming enough on the surface." "Marcus is always charming on the surface. It is what lies beneath that concerns me." He hesitated, then added, "I should have warned you about him. I apologize." "There is nothing to apologize for. I am quite capable of managing charming men with hidden agendas." She smiled slightly. "I married one, after all." For a moment, Sebastian simply stared at her. Then, unexpectedly, his lips twitched, not quite a smile, but closer than she had ever seen. "I suppose you did," he said. Marcus stayed for a fortnight after the funeral, filling Ashworth Park with noise and guests, and the brittle gaiety of a man who seemed constitutionally unable to be still. He threw himself into the role of bereaved grandson with theatrical enthusiasm, speaking warmly of the dowager to visitors and organizing elaborate dinners in her memory that seemed more about displaying his own generosity than honoring the dead. Through it all, Sebastian retreated. Not into the frozen distance of before, that ice had cracked too thoroughly to reform, but into a quieter withdrawal, a reserve born of grief rather than self-protection. He attended the dinners Marcus organized, but said little, endured the parade of sympathetic visitors, but escaped as soon as courtesy allowed, and spent increasing amounts of time in the library with Rosalind, where Marcus's relentless brightness could not reach. "He exhausts me," Sebastian admitted one evening, watching the fire rather than meeting her eyes. "He has always exhausted me, but now I have no patience left for performance." "Then don't perform." Rosalind set aside her embroidery. She had taken it up more for the excuse to sit with Sebastian than any real interest in needlework, and turned to face him fully. "This is your house. You are the Duke. If you wish Marcus to leave, you have only to say so. He is my brother, and you are grieving. You are allowed to grieve in peace." Sebastian was quiet for a long moment. Then slowly, he reached out and took her hand, a gesture that still surprised her each time he initiated it, a small miracle of thawing that she treasured more than she could say. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for understanding. I have my moments. You have rather more than moments." He met her eyes then, and what she saw there made her breath catch. Not love, not yet, perhaps not ever, but something warmer than duty, deeper than convenience. "I have not been fair to you, Rosalind. I married you expecting to feel nothing, and you have refused to allow that. You have pushed and prodded and demanded that I be human, despite my best efforts to remain frozen. Is that a complaint? It is a confession." His fingers tightened on hers. "I do not deserve your patience. I have given you nothing, no warmth, no affection, no companionship beyond what you have demanded for yourself. And yet you remain. You fight for this marriage as if it matters, as if I matter, when I have done everything in my power to convince you otherwise." Rosalind felt tears prick at her eyes. "You do matter. You have always mattered. I simply refuse to let you convince me otherwise." "Why?" "Because I recognized you." The words came before she could stop them, honest in a way she had not intended. "From the moment you walked into that garden and called my bluff, I recognized you. Another person wearing armor, pretending not to feel, convinced that the alternative was too dangerous to risk. And I thought—" She stopped, swallowed. "I thought perhaps we could learn to take off the armor together, if we were brave enough." Sebastian was staring at her with an expression she could not quite read, wonder, perhaps, or fear, or some complicated mixture of both. "And if I am not brave enough," he asked quietly, "then I will be brave for both of us, until you are ready to be brave too." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that lingered far longer than any formal gesture should. "I am beginning to believe," he said against her skin, "that marrying you may have been the wisest decision I ever made." Marcus departed the following week, summoned back to London by debts he did not specify, and creditors he mentioned only in passing. But before he left, he sought Rosalind out privately, cornering her in the conservatory while Sebastian was occupied with estate business. "I wanted to speak with you alone," he said, his charming smile firmly in place, "to apologize if I have been overwhelming. I know I can be somewhat much." "You have been perfectly appropriate," Rosalind replied cautiously. "Have I? That's a relief. I do worry sometimes that Sebastian's bride might find me too much by contrast. My brother is not exactly known for his vivacity. Your brother is a man of depth and substance. Those qualities are often mistaken for coldness by those who do not look beyond the surface." Marcus's smile flickered, something harder surfacing briefly behind his eyes. "And you have looked beyond the surface?" "I am learning to." How fortunate for him. He stepped closer, close enough that Rosalind could smell his cologne, expensive, cloying. I wonder, though, if you will feel the same when the novelty wears off, when the project of thawing my brother loses its appeal, when you realize that some walls are not meant to come down. Is that a warning, Lord Marcus? Merely an observation. He smiled again, all charm restored. Sebastian has never been able to sustain connections, relationships, friendships, family bonds. He pushes everyone away eventually. Our grandmother was the only one who refused to be pushed, and now she is gone. I simply wonder how long you will persist before you, too, accept defeat. Rosalind held his gaze steadily, refusing to show the chill his words had sent down her spine. I am not in the habit of accepting defeat, Lord Marcus. It is one of my more irritating qualities. So I am beginning to understand. He stepped back, his expression unreadable. Do take care of yourself, Your Grace. And do keep an eye on that husband of yours. He has a tendency to self-destruct when he is not watched. He left the conservatory without another word, but his warning echoed in Rosalind's mind long after his carriage had disappeared down the drive. Some walls are not meant to come down. He pushes everyone away eventually. Was Marcus right? Was she fighting a battle she could not win, investing in a man incapable of reciprocating? But then she thought of Sebastian's hand in hers, of his kiss on her knuckles, of the grief he had allowed her to witness, of the walls that had cracked under her persistent pressure, revealing glimpses of the warm man who still existed beneath the ice. No, Marcus was wrong. Sebastian was not pushing her away. He was letting her in, slowly, painfully, with all the awkwardness of a man who had forgotten how. And she would be there when he finally remembered. Winter deepened into the coldest January anyone could remember. Snow blanketing Ashworth Park in white and forcing Rosalind and Sebastian into even closer quarters. The household contracted, guests ceased to call, and the great house became almost intimate in its isolation. They spent hours together now, reading in the library, walking the galleries when the weather permitted, dining across a table that no longer felt like a chasm between them. Sebastian talked more, not much but enough, sharing memories of his grandmother, his childhood, the years before the ice had formed. And Rosalind talked too, telling him about her sharp-tongued reputation, her mother's disappointment, the fears that had driven her own defences for so long. "We are well matched, it seems," Sebastian observed one evening, watching her across the firelight. "Both of us building walls against a world we found too painful to face unarmoured. Perhaps that is why you chose me." Rosalind looked up from her book. "You recognized a fellow builder." "Perhaps." He was quiet for a moment, then added, "I told you once that I chose you because you did not want me. That was not entirely true." "Oh?" "I chose you because you made me laugh." He said it almost grudgingly, as if the admission cost him something. "In the garden, when you made your ridiculous declaration about marrying the first man through the gate. I had not truly laughed in 12 years. And then I heard you, speaking with such desperation and such wit, and something in my chest cracked, just for a moment. I did not see you laugh. I did not let you see, but it was there, beneath the surface, a spark of something I thought I had extinguished forever." He met her eyes, his gaze unusually open. "You have been fanning that spark ever since. Sometimes I wish you would let it die. But mostly, I am grateful." Rosalind set aside her book and rose, crossing the space between them to stand before his chair. He looked up at her, and for once there was no guard in his expression, no shield, only raw uncertainty, and something that might have been hope. "I will keep fanning it," she said quietly, "for as long as it takes, until it becomes a fire that cannot be extinguished." She leaned down and pressed a kiss to his forehead, gentle, chaste, but intentional. A promise. When she pulled back, his eyes were closed, and she saw a single tear trace down his cheek. Helena's letter arrived the first week of February, carried by a messenger who had braved the snowy roads from London. "My dearest Rosalind," it began, in Helena's elegant hand, "I hope this finds you well, though I suspect 'well' may be an optimistic assessment given the reports I have received about the Duke's grandmother. Please know that you are in my thoughts during this difficult time. I write, however, with news that may complicate your circumstances further. Marcus has been in London for several weeks now, and his behaviour has raised concerns. He speaks of you frequently, too frequently, and in terms that suggest familiarity beyond what propriety would allow. He implies that your marriage is unhappy, that Sebastian neglects you, that you have confided in him certain dissatisfactions. I do not believe any of this, of course, but others do. And Marcus, I fear, is working to position himself for some future where Sebastian's marriage fails and the question of succession remains unresolved. I tell you this not to alarm, but to warn. Whatever is happening at Ashworth Park, be careful how it is perceived by the outside world, and watch your brother-in-law. He is not the charming fool he pretends to be." With love and concern, Helena Rosalind read the letter twice, her heart sinking with each word. Marcus was undermining her marriage, spreading rumours, casting doubt, positioning himself as her confidant in an unhappy situation. And society, always hungry for scandal, was undoubtedly devouring every morsel he offered. She brought the letter to Sebastian that evening, laying it before him without preamble. "You should read this." He did, his expression darkening as he absorbed Helena's words. When he finished, he set the letter down with careful precision, his jaw tight with barely controlled anger. "I will deal with Marcus." "How?" "I do not yet know, but he will not be permitted to continue spreading lies about my wife." My wife. The words sent an unexpected warmth through her, even amid the anxiety of the moment. He had never called her that before, not with that particular emphasis, that edge of possessiveness. "Helena says we should be careful how we are perceived," she said. "Perhaps when the weather clears, we should return to London. Show society that our marriage is not what Marcus claims." Sebastian looked at her, something complicated moving behind his eyes. "And is it what Marcus claims?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean?" "You have been patient with me, Rosalind, more patient than I deserve. But patience is not happiness, and I have given you—" He stopped, struggling for words. "I have given you very little to be happy about." "That is not true. Is it not? We have been married nearly 4 months. We share meals, conversations, the occasional library evening, but we do not share—" He broke off again, his cheeks flushing slightly. "We do not share what married people are supposed to share." Rosalind felt her own face heat. They had not discussed this, the physical aspect of their arrangement, the air he had said he required. After the wedding night, he had maintained careful distance, and she had not pushed, sensing that intimacy would need to come at his pace if it was to mean anything. "I did not wish to presume," she said carefully. "You made clear that you wanted nothing more than—" "I made clear many things that are no longer true." He rose abruptly, crossing to the window to stare out at the snow-covered gardens. "I told you I was incapable of feeling. That was a lie I had told myself so often that I believed it. But since my grandmother's death, since you refused to let me retreat, I have felt more than I have in 12 years, and I do not know what to do with any of it." Rosalind rose and crossed to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "What do you feel?" she asked softly. He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough, uncertain. "Gratitude," Terror. Confusion. Another pause. And something else. Something I have been afraid to name because naming it makes it real. And real things can be lost. Sebastian, I am not in love with you. He turned to face her, his expression torn between honesty and something that looked almost like hope. I do not know how to be in love. Not anymore. But I am something. Something more than indifferent. Something that frightens me more than I can say. Rosalind reached up and touched his face, feeling the tension in his jaw, the rapid pulse in his throat. That is enough, she said. For now, that is enough. We do not need to name it. We do not need to define it. We only need to let it be what it is. And what is it? A beginning. She smiled, feeling tears gather in her eyes. A real beginning, this time. Not an arrangement, or a convenience, or a bargain. Something more. He covered her hand with his, pressing her palm more firmly against his cheek. I want... He stopped, swallowed. I want to try. To be the husband you deserve, not just the one you agreed to accept. I do not know if I am capable of it. I do not know if the damage is too deep, but I want to try. Then we will try together. He kissed her then tentatively at first, almost questioning, as if unsure whether she would allow it. But when she responded, when her arms went around his neck and her body pressed against his, something shifted. The hesitation melted away, replaced by a hunger that had been buried so long it felt almost new. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. I think, he said unsteadily, that we should return to London, to deal with Marcus, to deal with everything. He pulled back enough to meet her eyes, and what she saw there made her heart stutter. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it, the willingness to risk it. Together, she said. Together, he agreed. The word felt like a promise, a real one this time. And when they retired that night, the door between their chambers finally opened. The journey to London took 3 days through roads still treacherous with melting snow, but Rosalind barely noticed the discomfort. Everything had changed in the fortnight since that night in the library, that first tentative kiss that had opened doors long barred, the gradual unfolding of intimacy that followed. Sebastian was still learning to be vulnerable, still catching himself mid-retreat and forcing himself to stay present. But the effort he made was visible in every gesture, every glance, every moment he chose to reach for her instead of pulling away. They travelled in the same carriage now, sitting side by side rather than across from each other, and sometimes his hand found hers beneath the travelling blankets, holding on as if she were an anchor in uncertain waters. He did not speak much that was not his nature, and perhaps never would be. But the quality of his silence had changed. It was no longer the frozen stillness of a man determined to feel nothing. It was the quietude of someone learning to feel again, processing emotions too long suppressed. "You are nervous," Rosalind observed, as London's outskirts came into view through the carriage window. Sebastian's jaw tightened. "Marcus will have had weeks to spread his poison. I do not know what we will face." "We will face it together." She squeezed his hand. "That is rather the point." "I am not accustomed to together." He turned to look at her, his grey eyes softer than she had ever seen them. "I am accustomed to alone, to handling everything myself, keeping everyone at a distance, never admitting weakness or uncertainty." "How is that working for you?" The ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Poorly, as it happens." "Then perhaps it is time to try something new." Ashworth House loomed before them as the carriage swept up the drive, its imposing facade a reminder of the weight of responsibility Sebastian carried. Rosalind had visited only once before, for a brief inspection before the wedding, and she had been too overwhelmed then to take proper stock of her new London home. Now she studied it with different eyes, the eyes of a woman who had begun to understand her husband, who was fighting for a marriage that had started as mere convenience and was becoming something far more significant. The staff lined up to greet them, faces carefully neutral, and Rosalind caught the flicker of curiosity in more than one pair of eyes. The Duke of Ashworth, returning to London with his wife after months of seclusion in Kent. The gossip must be rampant. "Your Grace," the butler, the silver-haired man named Thornton, bowed deeply. "Welcome home? We have prepared the house as instructed." "Thank you, Thornton. Her Grace will be using the Duchess's suite." Sebastian's hand came to rest at the small of Rosalind's back, a gesture of possession that was also, somehow, one of protection. "Please ensure she has everything she requires." "Of course, Your Grace." They entered the house together, and Rosalind felt the weight of dozens of eyes following them, servants noting the Duke's hand on her back, the way he leaned toward her when he spoke, all the small intimacies that marked their changed relationship. By evening, every household in London would know that the Duke and Duchess of Ashworth appeared to be on excellent terms, which was precisely the point. The first salvo in their campaign came that very evening, in the form of a dinner invitation from Lady Pemberton, mother of the unfortunate daughter, hostess of one of the most influential tables in London society. Rosalind recognized the woman's name from her first season, remembered her as a sharp-eyed gossip who collected secrets like other women collected china. "We should accept," Sebastian said, reading the invitation over Rosalind's shoulder. "Lady Pemberton sees everything and talks to everyone. If we can convince her that our marriage is solid, the news will spread faster than any denial we could issue. And if we cannot convince her, then we will have a rather uncomfortable dinner and try again elsewhere." He set the invitation aside and met her eyes. "I should warn you I am not skilled at social performance. I have spent 12 years cultivating a reputation for coldness. Pretending to be a devoted husband may be beyond my abilities." Rosalind smiled. "Then do not pretend. Simply be what you are becoming." "And what is that?" "A man who is learning to let himself be loved." Something flickered in his eyes, that raw vulnerability she had begun to recognize, the part of him that still could not quite believe this was real. But he did not retreat, did not raise his walls. He simply nodded and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I will try," he said, "for you." Lady Pemberton's dinner was a glittering affair, the cream of London society packed into a dining room designed to impress and intimidate. Rosalind recognized faces from her failed season's women who had pitied her, men who had dismissed her, society matrons who had clucked their tongues over her sharp tongue and unmarriageable nature. Now they stared with open curiosity as she entered on the arm of the Duke of Ashworth. She felt Sebastian tense beside her, felt the rigid posture that was his default response to social situations. But when she squeezed his arm gently, he glanced down at her, and something in his expression softened. "Courage," she murmured. "I was about to say the same to you." They moved through the crowd together, a united front that drew whispers in its wake. Rosalind caught fragments of conversation. "Never seen him so attentive. She looks well." Marcus said they barely spoke, and allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. Let them wonder. Let them gossip, as long as the gossip favoured her marriage rather than undermined it. Lady Pemberton descended upon them with all the subtlety of a cavalry charge. "Your Graces, how delightful that you could join us." Her sharp eyes swept over them both, missing nothing. "We had begun to despair of seeing you in London this season. The Kent countryside must be very appealing indeed." "My grandmother's final illness required my presence," Sebastian replied, his voice carefully neutral. "Now that we have attended to family matters, I saw no reason to deprive my wife of the pleasures of the season." "How thoughtful of you." Lady Pemberton's gaze fixed on Rosalind with predatory interest. "And how are you finding married life, Your Grace? It must be quite an adjustment after so many years." She trailed off delicately, the implication clear. "After so many years of failure to secure a husband." "I am finding it most agreeable," Rosalind replied, keeping her voice pleasant despite the barb. "The Duke has been everything that is considerate." "Has he?" Lady Pemberton's eyebrows rose. "That is not quite the impression one receives from certain quarters." Sebastian's hand tightened on Rosalind's arm, but his expression remained impassive. "I cannot account for the impressions of certain quarters. I can only assure you that my wife speaks the truth." Of course. But Lady Pemberton's smile suggested she was filing this exchange away for future analysis. "Well, I must circulate. Do enjoy the evening." She swept away, leaving Rosalind and Sebastian in a pocket of relative privacy. "That woman is dangerous," Sebastian murmured. "That woman is the key to London society. If we can convince her, we can convince anyone." "And if we cannot?" Rosalind looked up at him, at the face she had grown to know so well over these past months, the sharp features, the winter-grey eyes, the rare smile that transformed his entire countenance when it appeared. "Then we will weather the storm together," she said, "as we have weathered everything else." Dinner itself was an exercise in careful diplomacy. Rosalind found herself seated between Lord Hartley, a bore of the first water, and Sir Edmund Crawley, whose interest in agricultural reform might have been fascinating had he not been so determined to explain it in excruciating detail. Sebastian was at the far end of the table, separated from her by a sea of guests, but she caught his eye occasionally across the candelabras, and saw the same grimly determined expression she suspected she was wearing. This was the battlefield, and they would win it together. The real challenge came after dinner, when the ladies withdrew, and Rosalind found herself surrounded by curious matrons and sharp-tongued debutantes. Lady Pemberton took the seat beside her with the air of a general, deploying for combat. "Now then, Your Grace, let us speak frankly." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a confidential murmur. "Lord Marcus has been most vocal about the state of your marriage. He implies that the Duke neglects you terribly, that you have confided your unhappiness to him during his visit to Kent." "Lord Marcus has always had an active imagination," Rosalind replied coolly. "I assure you, any confidences I made to him were strictly appropriate. If he has interpreted them otherwise, that is his error, not my intention." "And the Duke? Is he truly as attentive as he appeared this evening, or was that performance for our benefit?" Rosalind considered her response carefully. Lady Pemberton dealt in truth, or at least in what she believed to be truth. An obvious lie would be detected and reported throughout London by morning. "My husband is not a demonstrative man," she said finally. "He does not shower me with public affection or declare his feelings in flowery speeches. But he is present, Lady Pemberton. He is learning to be present, after many years of—" She paused, choosing her words. "After many years of keeping his heart protected, and I would rather have his genuine effort than any amount of practiced charm." Lady Pemberton studied her for a long moment, her sharp eyes searching for deception. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her, because her expression shifted from skepticism to something approaching approval. "Well," she said at last, "you are more interesting than I remembered, Your Grace, and considerably more honest. I begin to think that Marcus Cole has overplayed his hand." That is generally the way of it with Marcus, Rosalind agreed. He is charming but unsubtle. Lady Pemberton laughed a genuine laugh, surprised out of her. You have a sharp tongue, Your Grace. I have been told so, yes, frequently, and with disapproval. I expect you have, but I find I rather like it. Lady Pemberton rose, signalling the end of their tête-à-tête. I shall be watching your marriage with interest, Your Grace. I suspect it may prove more entertaining than most. When the gentleman rejoined them and Sebastian made his way to her side, his hand finding hers with an ease that no longer seemed quite so unnatural, Rosalind allowed herself a small smile of triumph. One battle won, many more to come. Marcus arrived at Ashworth House 3 days later, unannounced and uninvited. Rosalind was in the morning room, reviewing the household accounts with Mrs. Collins, the London housekeeper, when Thornton appeared with a carefully neutral expression. Lord Marcus Cole, Your Grace. He wishes to see the Duke, but his Grace is not at home. Lord Marcus asks if you might receive him. Rosalind set down her pen, her heart rate increasing despite her best efforts at composure. She had known this confrontation was coming, had been preparing for it, in fact, but the reality of facing Marcus alone still sent a chill down her spine. Show him in, she said. And Thornton, please ensure that refreshments are brought and that the door remains open. Of course, Your Grace. Marcus entered with his customary charm, all smiles and easy confidence. But Rosalind caught the calculation behind his eyes. He had come for a purpose, and it was not mere social courtesy. Sister. He kissed her hand with elaborate courtesy. How delightful to find you at home. I had hoped to catch Sebastian, but perhaps you and I can have a cosy chat instead. Perhaps we can. Rosalind gestured to a chair, not returning his smile. Although I should warn you that I am aware of the nature of your chats in London, the ones where you imply my marriage is unhappy and my husband neglects me. Marcus's expression flickered surprise, quickly masked. Ah, you have heard about that? I have heard about it, yes, as has Sebastian, and as has most of London by now. I was merely expressing concern for your welfare. You were attempting to undermine my marriage for your own purposes. Rosalind kept her voice level, refusing to show anger. You have been positioning yourself as my confidant, spreading rumors of discord, preparing the ground for some future where Sebastian and I fail, and the succession remains in doubt. You give me too much credit for strategy. I give you exactly the credit you deserve. She leaned forward slightly. I know what you want, Marcus. You want the title, the estates, the fortune that should have been yours if only Sebastian had died in that carriage accident along with Catherine. You have spent 12 years watching him waste his life in frozen misery, waiting for him to die without an heir, and now I have disrupted your plans. Marcus's charm fell away like a discarded mask, revealing the harder man beneath. You understand nothing about what I want? Then enlighten me. I want what should have been mine. His voice was low, intense. I was the better son, the warmer one, the one who actually cared about people. Sebastian locked himself away in his frozen fortress while I tried to hold the family together, tried to be there for our grandmother, tried to salvage something from the wreckage he made of himself. And what is my reward? To watch him inherit everything while I scrape by on an allowance that would not cover his monthly wine bill. Your gambling debts would consume any fortune, Rosalind said quietly. Sebastian has told me about the settlements he has made on your behalf, the creditors he has paid, the scandals he has covered up. He told you that? Something ugly flickered in Marcus's eyes. He told me many things, including his concerns that you would destroy the Ashworth legacy within a year of inheriting. And yet he refuses to increase my allowance, refuses to give me any real responsibility, any real position. because you have proven yourself unworthy of it. Rosalind stood, signaling that the interview was nearly over. I'm sorry for your disappointments, Marcus. Truly I am, but I will not allow you to destroy my marriage in pursuit of your own ambitions. You think your marriage can survive what is coming? Marcus rose as well, his expression dark. Sebastian cannot love you. He is incapable of it. He will retreat into his ice eventually, and you will be left alone in that great cold house, wondering why you ever thought you could save him. Perhaps. Rosalind met his gaze without flinching. Or perhaps I will prove you wrong. Either way, you will not be there to witness it. Sebastian is preparing to cut your allowance significantly in response to your behavior, and I rather think he may ask you to avoid Ashworth properties for the foreseeable future. He cannot. He can. He is the Duke, Marcus, and I am the Duchess. Between us, we have rather more power than you seem to realize. For a long moment, Marcus simply stared at her. Then, slowly, his charming mask slid back into place, but it was thinner now, the calculation beneath more visible. You are not what I expected, he said. When Sebastian announced his engagement, I thought a desperate spinster, grateful for any match, someone I could manipulate, could use to my advantage. He shook his head. I underestimated you. Most people do. It is one of my few advantages. It is more than one. He moved toward the door, pausing on the threshold. You may have won this round, Your Grace, but my brother's demons are older and deeper than you know. Do not be surprised when they swallow him whole. He left before she could respond, and Rosalind sank back into her chair, suddenly trembling with the effort of maintaining her composure. Her hands shook as she reached for her cold tea, and she had to set the cup down before she spilled it. She had stood her ground. She had defended her marriage, exposed Marcus's machinations, asserted her power as Duchess. But his final words echoed in her mind, refusing to be silenced. My brother's demons are older and deeper than you know. What else was there? What other shadows lurked in Sebastian's past, waiting to emerge and destroy everything they had built? Sebastian found her still in the morning room an hour later, staring at nothing. Thornton told me Marcus was here. He crossed to her side, his expression concerned. Are you all right? I'm fine. She forced a smile. We had a frank exchange of views. How frank? I may have informed him that you were cutting his allowance and banning him from family properties. Sebastian's eyebrows rose. Did you? I thought it best to be direct. She looked up at him. Was I wrong? No. He took the chair across from her, his gaze searching her face. I was going to tell him the same thing myself. I am only sorry you had to bear the brunt of his reaction. He was unpleasant, but not dangerous. She hesitated. He said something before he left, about your demons being older and deeper than I know. Sebastian went very still. Did he? What did he mean? Rosalind, I need to know. She reached out and took his hand, feeling the tension in his fingers. If there are shadows I do not yet understand, I need to know about them. I cannot fight what I cannot see. For a long moment he did not speak. His gaze dropped to their joined hands, his thumb tracing absent patterns on her skin. Catherine was not the first person I lost, he said finally. She was simply the last, before I decided to stop losing anyone. Tell me. My mother. His voice was rough. You know she died when I was young. What you may not know is that I was with her. I was 8 years old, sitting beside her bed, holding her hand while she faded away. She made me promise to take care of the family, to be strong, to carry the weight she was leaving behind. And then she was gone, and I was alone with a promise I had no idea how to keep. Rosalind tightened her grip on his hand, but did not speak. My father, he fell apart after she died, threw himself into drink, into affairs, into anything that would distract him from the grief. He was never cruel to Marcus and me, but he was absent, gone, even when he was in the same room. I tried to be what my mother had asked, strong, responsible, the one who held everything together, but I was a child. I was not equipped for the weight. No child would be. No. But I did not know that then. I only knew that I had promised, and I was failing. He looked up, meeting her eyes. When father died, I was 18, barely a man. I felt relief. Is that not terrible? Relief that the reminder of my failures was finally gone, that I could rebuild without his shadow hanging over everything. That is not terrible. That is human. Catherine understood that. She was the only one who ever understood, or so I thought. She listened when I spoke of my mother, my father, the weight I carried. She made me believe I could set it down, could be happy, could be something other than the cold, controlled duke I had become. His voice cracked slightly. And then she died too. And I knew it was my fault, whatever anyone said. Everyone I loved died. Everyone I allowed close was destroyed by that closeness. The only way to protect anyone, to protect myself, was to feel nothing, to need no one, to freeze. Oh, Sebastian! Rosalind rose and moved to his side, crouching beside his chair as she had done the night of the dowager's death. You have been carrying this alone for so long. It was safer alone. No. She touched his face, feeling the dampness on his cheeks. It was lonelier. There is a difference. I am trying. The words emerged broken. I am trying to be different, for you. But Marcus is not wrong, the demons are deep, and sometimes I feel them pulling at me, trying to drag me back into the ice. Then I will hold on tighter. She kissed his forehead, his cheeks, the corner of his mouth. I will not let them take you. I promise. You cannot promise that. I can promise to try. I can promise to fight. I can promise that, whatever comes, you will not face it alone. She pulled back enough to meet his eyes. You are not the frightened boy who made that promise to his mother. You are not the young man who lost Catherine. You are my husband, Sebastian. And I choose you, demons and all. He stared at her for a long moment, something crumbling behind his eyes. And then he pulled her into his arms and held on, as if she were the only solid thing in a world that had always felt precarious. Spring arrived in London with its customary flourish of blossoms and social obligations, and Rosalind found herself busier than she had ever been. Her position as Duchess of Ashworth opened doors that had been firmly closed to Lady Rosalind Blackwell invitations to the most exclusive gatherings, requests for patronage from charitable organizations, an endless stream of morning callers eager to curry favor with one of the most powerful women in society. It was exhausting. It was exhilarating. And through it all, Sebastian was at her side. Not always physically, his duties in the House of Lords and his estate business often kept them apart during the day, but present in a way he had never been before. He appeared at her side during evening events, his hand finding hers in crowds, his attention never straying far, even when duty demanded he speak to others. He asked about her day, listened to her observations about the people they met, shared his own thoughts in a way that suggested he valued her opinion. It was not the grand passion of novels. It was something quieter, steadier, a partnership built on mutual respect and growing affection, and Rosalind found, to her surprise, that she preferred it to any dramatic romance. "You have changed him." Helena made the observation over tea one April afternoon, watching Rosalind with knowing eyes. She had come to London for the season. Her grief for her late husband finally softened enough to allow re-entry into society, and she had become a regular visitor to Ashworth House. "He has changed himself," Rosalind corrected. "I merely provided motivation." "That is generous of you, but I have known Sebastian for years since Catherine, since the freezing. I never thought I would see him warm again." Helena set down her teacup. "He looks at you the way he used to look at her, as if you are the most fascinating person in any room." Rosalind felt heat rise to her cheeks. "You exaggerate." "I do not. Ask anyone. The Ice Duke has thawed, and all of London is gossiping about why." Helena smiled. "They are crediting your sharp tongue, you know. The theory is that only someone willing to challenge him could have broken through his defenses. They may not be wrong. No, I suspect they are not." Helena hesitated. "Have you told him?" "Told him what?" "That you love him." The question landed like a stone in still water. Rosalind opened her mouth to deflect, to joke, to do any of the things she usually did when conversations ventured too close to genuine emotion, but Helena was watching her with those knowing eyes, and somehow the deflections died unspoken. "No," she admitted quietly. "I have not told him." "Why not?" "Because I am afraid." The confession came harder than she expected. "He has made such progress, such tremendous progress, but he still flinches sometimes, still retreats. And I'm afraid that if I tell him, if I put that weight on him, he will feel obligated to reciprocate before he is ready. Or he will feel free to say it back. Or that. But—" Rosalind shook her head. "It has only been a few months, Helena. Months since he even admitted he could feel anything. I do not want to rush him. You are protecting him. I am protecting us. Both of us." Helena was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and took Rosalind's hand. "I understand caution," she said. "I understand fear. But I also know that sometimes we protect ourselves out of love that we mistake for prudence. Do not wait too long, Rosalind. Life has a way of stealing opportunities while we are busy being careful." The words stayed with her long after Helena had gone. Do not wait too long. But how long was too long? And how would she know when Sebastian was ready to hear the truth she had been carrying for weeks now, the truth that had crept up on her gradually, through shared silences and tentative touches, and the slow revelation of the man beneath the ice? She loved him. She loved him, and she did not know how to tell him without risking everything they had built. The crisis came, as crises do, without warning. They were at the Worthington Ball, one of the largest events of the season, when Marcus appeared. Rosalind had assumed he would avoid them, given the terms on which they had parted, but she had underestimated his desperation. He was drunk. That much was clear from his unsteady gait as he approached them on the dance floor, from the reckless gleam in his eyes, from the way his usual charm had curdled into something ugly and dangerous. "Brother." He stopped directly in front of Sebastian, blocking their path. "And the lovely Duchess. How delightful." "Marcus." Sebastian's voice was flat, controlled. "You should not be here." "Why not? Because you have banished me from polite society along with family property?" Marcus's laugh was too loud, drawing attention from nearby couples. "Did you think I would slink away quietly, accept my diminished circumstances without protest? I thought you might have the sense to avoid creating a scene." "A scene? Is that what concerns you?" Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper that nevertheless carried to curious ears. "You should be more concerned about what I know, what I could tell everyone here about the great Duke of Ashworth and his convenient marriage." Rosalind felt Sebastian's arm tense beneath her hand. Marcus, this is not the place. This is the perfect place. Marcus turned to address the growing crowd around them. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to share something interesting about my brother's marriage. Did you know that he proposed to his wife because she made a joke? I'll marry the first man who enters, she said, and he walked in. He was not laughing. He was calculating. He saw an opportunity for a compliant wife who expected nothing, and he seized it. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Rosalind felt her face flame. That is enough. Sebastian's voice cut through the murmurs like a blade. Whatever grievances you have with me, this is not the way. What is the way, Sebastian? Should I have continued to accept my position as your impoverished heir, waiting patiently while you got an heir on your convenient wife? Marcus's voice rose again. Should I have smiled and nodded while you froze everyone out, content to be forgotten until you needed something from me? You have brought your circumstances on yourself. Your gambling, your debts. And who drove me to those, brother? Who made it clear from childhood that I was the spare, the afterthought, the one who would never matter unless you died? Marcus was shouting now. You were always mother's favourite, always the one everyone watched. And after she died, you got father's attention too, even if it was only his disapproval. What did I get? Nothing. I got nothing. While you froze yourself in guilt over a woman you probably never loved in the first place. The slap of Sebastian's hand against Marcus's face echoed through the suddenly silent ballroom. Rosalind had never seen Sebastian lose control, not once, in all their months together. But Marcus had found the weak point, the spot where the ice was thinnest, and he had struck with vicious precision. Catherine. He had invoked Catherine. How dare you? Sebastian's voice was barely recognizable, shaking with a rage that had been frozen for over a decade. How dare you speak of her? Why not? You never did. You locked her away like everything else you felt, and you expected the rest of us to pretend she never existed. Marcus touched his reddened cheek, something bitter and satisfied in his expression. At least I made you feel something, brother, after all these years. Sebastian stepped forward, and Rosalind grabbed his arm. Stop! She put herself between them, facing her husband with every ounce of authority she possessed. Not here. Not like this. He has no right. I know he has no right. But if you continue this, you will give him exactly what he wants, proof that the Ice Duke can be provoked, that his control is a facade, that his demons are still in charge. She held his gaze, willing him to hear her. You are better than this. You are stronger than this. Please, Sebastian, walk away. For a terrible moment, she thought he would ignore her. The rage in his eyes was so raw, so unfamiliar, that she hardly recognized him. But then something shifted. The rage banked, controlled, pushed back beneath the surface. You are right, he said quietly. As always. He turned and walked away, leaving Marcus and the gaping crowd behind. Rosalind followed, her heart pounding, aware of every whisper and stare that tracked their exit. The scandal would be all over London by morning. Whatever progress they had made in rehabilitating their image, Marcus had undone in 5 minutes of drunken spite. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, she needed to reach her husband before the ice reformed entirely. She found him in the carriage, sitting in the darkness with his head in his hands. Sebastian. He did not look up. I should not have struck him. No. But you stopped yourself from doing worse. That matters. Does it? He raised his head, and even in the dim light she could see the devastation in his expression. He was right, Rosalind. About all of it. I have spent my life frozen, pushing everyone away, expecting the world to accommodate my grief. I married you for convenience. I treated you as a solution rather than a person. Stop. She sat beside him and took his hands in hers. "Listen to me. Whatever Marcus said, whatever truths he wrapped in cruelty, they do not define our marriage. The way we started does not dictate the way we continue. I have given you so little. You have given me everything." The words came easily now, the fear falling away in the face of his pain. "You have given me honesty, Sebastian. Genuine honesty, not the polished pretense society trades in. You have given me partnership, a true partnership, where my voice matters and my presence is valued. You have given me hope that I might actually be loved for who I am, sharp tongue and difficult nature and all. Rosalind, I love you." She said it simply, directly, with none of the careful hedging she had planned. "I love you, Sebastian, not despite your coldness or your grief or your demons, but because of who you are beneath all of it. The man who checks on the tenant farmers and funds schools in secret and holds my hand when he thinks no one is watching. That is who I love. And nothing Marcus says can change that." He stared at her in the darkness, his expression unreadable. "You love me," he repeated, as if testing the words for truth. "I love you. I have loved you for weeks, probably longer. I was afraid to say it, afraid of pressuring you, afraid of rushing what was growing between us. But Marcus made me realize that I cannot protect us by staying silent. I can only protect us by speaking the truth." "The truth?" His voice was rough. "And what is the truth about me?" "The truth is that you are learning to feel again, that you have made more progress in 6 months than most people make in a lifetime, that every day you choose to be present instead of frozen is a victory, even when it does not feel like one." She squeezed his hands. "The truth is that I am proud of you, Sebastian. Proud to be your wife. And nothing Marcus or anyone else says can take that away." He was quiet for a long moment. The carriage rocked gently as it made its way through London's dark streets. And then, slowly, he lifted her hands to his lips and kissed them. "I am not—" He stopped, swallowed. "I am not certain I know how to love. It has been so long since I allowed myself to feel anything resembling, but when I look at you—" He broke off again, struggling for words that did not come easily. "When I look at you, I feel something that frightens me and steadies me in equal measure, something that makes me want to be better than I am." "That is love," Rosalind said gently. "Or at least it is how love begins." "Is it enough? For you?" "It is everything." She leaned forward and kissed him, softly, a promise rather than a demand. "It is everything I need." The scandal, as expected, was tremendous. For 3 days, London talked of nothing else the Duke of Ashworth striking his brother at the Worthington ball, the confrontation witnessed by half of society, the accusations Marcus had hurled about convenient marriages and frozen hearts. Lady Pemberton's drawing-room was reportedly the site of endless speculation about what it all meant for the Ashworth succession. Sebastian and Rosalind weathered it together. They did not hide. They attended events, made calls, presented a united front that contradicted every word Marcus had spoken. Sebastian was more publicly affectionate than he had ever been, taking her hand, leaning close to speak to her, looking at her in ways that left no doubt about his feelings, even if he had not yet spoken the words. And slowly the tide turned. Lady Pemberton, proving herself as formidable an ally as she had been a potential enemy, began circulating a counter-narrative. Lord Marcus Cole, she declared, was a bitter wastrel who had been cut off by his family for excellent reasons. His attack on his brother and sister-in-law was nothing but spite, the flailing of a man who saw his hopes of inheritance slipping away. By the end of the week, Marcus had become a pariah, and the Duke and Duchess of Ashworth had become objects of admiration, a love match that had triumphed over family opposition, a frozen man thawed by the right woman, a romance worthy of the novels that circulated through drawing-rooms across London. It was not quite the truth, but it was close enough. Marcus departed London shortly thereafter, bound for the continent and an uncertain future. Sebastian received a brief letter informing him of his brother's plans. He read it once, set it aside, and never mentioned it again. "Are you all right?" Rosalind asked that evening. "About Marcus?" "I do not know." Sebastian stared into the fire, his expression thoughtful rather than frozen. "He is my brother. I should feel something grief, perhaps, or anger, or regret. But mostly I feel relief." "That does not make you a bad person, does it not? He is alone in the world now, cast out from family and society alike. And I am here, with everything, the title, the fortune, you. You did not cast him out. He cast himself out, through choices he made long before you cut his allowance." Rosalind settled beside him on the sofa. "And he may yet redeem himself. People do, sometimes, find their way back from the edge. Do you believe that?" "I believe in second chances. I have to." She smiled slightly. "I married a man who was giving himself one, after all." He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. "I love you." The words fell into the silence between them, simple and direct, without fanfare or flourish. Rosalind felt her breath catch. "What?" "I love you." He said it again, more steadily this time. "I have been trying to find the right words, the right moment, and there is never a right moment, so I am simply saying it. I love you, Rosalind. I love your sharp tongue and your stubborn spirit and the way you refuse to let me freeze you out. I love that you fight for things worth fighting for, and that you decided our marriage was worth fighting for, even when I gave you every reason to walk away." Tears pricked at her eyes. "Sebastian, I know I have been slow. I know I am still learning, still healing, still fighting demons that have lived in me for over a decade. But I wanted you to know, I wanted you to hear the words that you are not alone in this. Whatever we are building, whatever we are becoming, I am in it, completely, for the rest of my life." She kissed him then, deeply, thoroughly, with all the emotion she had been holding back for months. And when they finally broke apart, both breathless, she saw something in his eyes that she had never seen before. Joy. Simple, uncomplicated joy. "I love you too," she whispered, in case there was any doubt. There was not. He pulled her close, tucking her against his side. "But it is nice to hear all the same." 8 years later, on a warm June afternoon, Rosalind stood at the window of Ashworth Park and watched her husband teaching their eldest son to ride. James was 7, dark-haired like his father, and quick-witted like his mother, with a stubborn streak that promised interesting times ahead. His twin sister Elizabeth was with her grandmother Rosalind's mother, who had softened considerably since becoming a grandmother, learning embroidery she would almost certainly abandon within the hour. And their youngest, 4-year-old Catherine, named for the woman Sebastian had loved and lost, was napping in the nursery under the watchful eye of her nurse. 3 children in 8 years. A family that had grown organically, unexpectedly, from a marriage that had started as a joke and a business arrangement. Sometimes Rosalind still marveled at how far they had come. Helena appeared beside her, holding a glass of lemonade. Her marriage to Marcus reformed, humbled, and genuinely changed after 3 years of continental wandering was in its 2nd year now, and she divided her time between Marcus's small estate in Hampshire and visits to Ashworth Park. "He is a natural," Helena observed, watching Sebastian steady James in the saddle. "I never would have believed it. watching him all those years ago. The Ice Duke, teaching a child to ride. He has hidden depths, Rosalind smiled. It merely took some excavation to find them, and considerable determination. That too. They watched in companionable silence as Sebastian swung up onto his own horse and led James at a careful walk around the paddock. From this distance, Rosalind could not hear their conversation, but she could see the way Sebastian leaned toward his son, patient and attentive, offering guidance without taking over. He had become the father neither of them had expected him to be. Warm, present, engaged in a way that still surprised him sometimes. He still retreated. Occasionally, the demons had not vanished entirely, but he always came back. Always reached for her in the dark times, instead of pushing away. "He is lucky to have you," Helena said quietly. "We are lucky to have each other." Rosalind took a sip of her lemonade. It was not luck that built this, though. It was work. Hard work, on both our parts, and a willingness to keep trying when everything seemed hopeless. Is that the secret, then, to a successful marriage? There is no secret. Only choice choosing each other every day, even when it would be easier to retreat. Rosalind watched as James successfully guided his pony in a small circle, Sebastian's face breaking into a smile of genuine pride. And perhaps a sharp tongue. That seems to have helped. Helena laughed. "I shall tell Marcus. He claims my sharp tongue is a hindrance rather than an asset. Marcus is wrong about many things. That is merely one of them." The riding lesson ended, and Sebastian lifted James down from the saddle, swinging the boy onto his shoulders for the walk back to the house. Rosalind felt her heart swell at the sight her husband and her son, silhouetted against the summer sky, so different from the cold and frozen man she had married 8 years ago. That man still existed, somewhere deep inside, but he was no longer in charge. He had been replaced slowly, painfully, triumphantly by someone who knew how to love and be loved in return. Sebastian looked up as he approached the house, his gaze finding Rosalind at the window. Even at this distance she could see his smile, that rare, transformative smile that still made her breath catch. "Mama!" James shouted, waving wildly from his father's shoulders. "I rode all by myself." "I saw," Rosalind waved back. "You were magnificent." "He was adequate," Sebastian corrected, but his tone was warm with affection. "With practice, he may become magnificent." "I shall practice every day," James declared. "And then I shall be the best rider in all of England." "A worthy goal." Sebastian set his son down at the terrace steps. "But first, wash up for tea. Your grandmother will not appreciate dirty hands at her table." James scampered inside, his energy apparently inexhaustible, leaving Sebastian and Rosalind alone on the terrace. Helena had tactfully withdrawn, citing letters she needed to write. "He has your determination," Sebastian observed, climbing the steps to join his wife, "and your stubbornness. A formidable combination." "Indeed." He pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I am told that stubbornness runs in the family." "So I have heard." She tilted her face up to look at him, drinking in the sight of this man who had become her world, the sharp features softened by years of genuine smiles, the winter-grey eyes that no longer seemed cold at all. "Do you remember what you said to me, the day we met?" "I said many things, most of them ill-advised." "You said you accepted my offer, that you were not laughing." "Ah." A smile tugged at his lips. "I remember. Are you laughing now?" He looked at her, at the wife he had chosen on an impulse and grown to love beyond measure, at the mother of his children, at the partner who had fought for him when he had forgotten how to fight for himself. "Yes," he said, "I rather think I am." And when he kissed her, with the summer sun warm on their faces, and the sounds of their children echoing through the house they had made a home. Rosalind thought about that desperate woman in the garden all those years ago. The woman who had made a joke because she could not face her reality, who had never truly believed anyone would choose her. That woman had been so afraid, so convinced that she was unlovable, that her sharp tongue and difficult nature would doom her to loneliness. She had been wrong. In the end, it had not been her sharp tongue that had sealed her fate. It had been her refusal to give up on herself, on Sebastian, on the possibility that even the coldest heart could learn to thaw. "I love you," she said against his lips. "Have I mentioned that today?" "Once or twice, but I find I never tire of hearing it." "Then I shall keep saying it, every day, for the rest of our lives." "That," Sebastian said, pulling her closer, "sounds like an excellent plan." And it was.